What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Biblical Hitman. It's me, Stephen. My two other co-hosts, Jesse and Taylor, are unfortunately not going to be with us tonight, but joining us for the first time is Austin Wade Picard. He's a independent researcher. He's in the podcast community. He's someone who also cannot stand being lied to by the mainstream media, and he's the host of the Underclass podcast. And folks, if it's your first time here or you're returning and you haven't done anything to support the show, the best thing that supports us is hitting that subscribe button, liking the show, sharing it with your friends. You can also support us on audio platforms as well, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. While you're there, 5-star review only, and comments and reviews, all the shebang. You know what to do, folks. But with all that out the way, Austin, brother, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, dude, I appreciate you because when I met you at Bro Grove, just instantly, you and the guys, I felt like there was some sort of kinship. We 100% relate in certain ways, and that was what I felt was so special about the event in general. Was like, it was kind of like a sort of, to me personally, I'm a little bit more like, I began my podcast, The Underclass, in April of 2023. So it still sort of feels like it's very much in its infancy. I'm at the beginning of the road in a certain way, but at the same time, like, it also felt like all this sort of, you know, this everything we've been working toward kind of culminated to this beautiful moment, right, at Bohemian Grove, and
Yeah,
we
awesome.
right, we were among dangerous retards, entirely kind of insulated from the rest of society in a certain moment that was just like beautiful to me, and I'll never forget it. I was very grateful, and then just also I think it was kind of like the manifestation of it all coming. Oh my God. Hold up.
Right
Sorry.
on. What's that?
I don't know what
dude?
is happening. Hold on.
On?
Hold on. Let me. I don't know what my wife's doing, but it's not you. Okay, somebody else is linking to my Bluetooth speaker.
Oh, wow. That is awesome.
This is what happens when you have neighbors in Los
Good
Angeles,
jams,
my friend. Hey, dude. I'm telling you right. Just unplug it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jeez, buddy. Keep your head on a swivel out here, my friend.
Oh,
My
that
bad.
is funny, dude.
But
I mean, what's gonna happen when we're all connected to AI, dude? People just gonna pop in your thoughts. You're like, dude, I'm
telling
sleeping.
you.
Stop.
I'm telling you right now, dude, I read about how they potentially can program you with subliminals, like utilizing EMF during your sleep. And this is like fascinating to me because, like, if you consider when I covered the James Holmes Aurora, Colorado shooting, right? I very much have been I've been extremely and extraordinarily interested in MKUltra from the very first moment I started the podcast, right? I think my first episode was MKUltra, and I think it's essentially due to the fact that we're very much kind of in this environment where we've been socially engineered into this state of mind where it does seem as if it's sort of like this, not even one nation under mind control. It almost extends internationally in scope, in my mind, to where we've been, manipulated just by these strange sort of operatives who have sophisticated these methods to such an extraordinary level over generations that it's hard for people to kind of come to grips. Because it almost feels like a science fiction novel, when you go into the details and the descriptive nature of what they have been able to accomplish, right? And just kind of fracturing the mind and the psyche. I was like quoting the John Ronson, right, in the psychopath test when I covered the psychopath machine, which is a very crazy story about essentially how Operation MKUltra's kind of the Montreal experiments, which was the way that they essentially kind of provided this aspect of, there was really like an avenue toward Dr. Ewan Cameron attempting to facilitate this sort of psychic driving technique, and he was affiliated with the CIA's Montreal experiments in Canada, and so it was really more of like MKUltra being exported to Canada in certain ways, right?
Oh, wow.
And yeah, the Oak Ridge facility was primary location for this experimental research that was being done by Dr. Barker. I forget his first name at this point, but it's been a while. But either way, it's very interesting once you look into it, because it seems as if they were attempting to create these sort of manufactured mercenaries, which what they realized was they could sort of fracture the mind of the average individual who wasn't already had these, preordained, characteristics in certain ways that they possessed, that really kind of fell into the framework of like sociopathic behavior, right? To certain extents, that you could kind of like place them on the path and psychologically manipulate them and lure them deceptively into different directions, to where they would kind of like help spotlight and then essentially kind of, in a way, they would encourage this behavior within the psychopath. And this was very interesting, but it turns out that what they viewed as far more effective was to just isolate various psychopaths who were already, showing these blatant characteristics of potentially, let's just say, child rape, serial murder, various, criminal, just
right. And it's crazy too, like when government is involved in things like that, right?
Exactly.
And especially, projects that are not disclosed publicly. The Senate doesn't know about it, Congress doesn't know about it, the president don't know about it unless he opens up the president's book, right? I'm referring to the was it a movie, National Treasure, or whatever it is. Who knows if there is a book like that? But with MKUltra, just for the audience that's not familiar with it, just kind of give us a breakdown of MKUltra.
Man, it's basically, if you it's very interesting, because MKUltra had so many different sub projects as well, and I've kind of like been attempting to hone in on more of the let's say like the trauma-based mind control, which was very specifically, I believe it was, the undertaking was very much under the direct sub project that was Project Monarch. But still, as far as just the origins of MKUltra, I mean, I believe it was Seymour Hersh who really helped expose a lot of this in the early 70s, which a lot of this began to come out, which was exposing the fact that clearly there was this illegal domestic operation conducted by the CIA and the intelligence agencies throughout the 60s. And this was all in order to effectively gain control of the human mind in various aspects, to where they could figure out how not only to utilize hypnotism, right, and various pharmaceutical methods as well, to effectively sort of create this individual Manchurian candidate, was one of the programs that they were allegedly pursuing at the time, which is very interesting. But a lot of this was exposed in the 70s, although I will say, as it was being exposed, this illegal CIA activity, in like 75, I believe 74 was when the Times was writing about it. But then the Pike Committee hearings were held, and the Church Committee hearings were held after that subsequently, and they called it the Year of Intelligence, I believe, was 75. And you essentially just discovered that the CIA was effectively utilizing these projects to manufacture mercenaries and Manchurian candidates to commit targeted assassinations, various domestic operations, but also this went entirely international in scope as well. I believe you can kind of witness that in terms of the sort of avenues of the aftermath and the consequences of it all. And Richard Helms himself, the head director of the CIA, during Watergate and that major scandal, he essentially ordered the destruction of thousands of files, which included many in regard to MKUltra, and it entirely, in my mind, it destroyed our capability and our effective window into actually being able to understand the full scope of what they're intending to not only pursue but accomplish with these various covert domestic operations and just intelligence operations to that effect. But when you realize everyone who was effectively involved in MKUltra, and you had these sort of hypnotists and these scientists like Dr. Louis Jolyon West and individuals such as that, which clearly, has insane connections to Charles Manson, Sirhan, Jack Ruby, Tamerlan Tsarnaev even, which is very interesting, and Patty Hearst, right, which people forget about, and I think MKUltra is an extension of sort of, not only were they attempting to socially engineer the minds of the public, but they were, at this point in time, they were utilizing like mescaline, sodium pentothal, and if you ever looked into Operation Midnight Climax, right, and you see that they were dosing Johns unbeknownst to them, and many of them were like veterans at the time, combat veterans riddled with PTSD, and were essentially kind of caught up in these experiments through these brothels where the CIA had these, they basically had two-way windows or one-way windows, what is it, where you can only see from one side clearly, and it's essentially you get the point. And effectively what was happening were these prostitutes and drug addicts, and then they would as far as the scope of Midnight Climax, they would dose the Johns utilizing the prostitutes, and then the prostitutes would leave the room, and they would kind of watch and see the behavior of the Johns themselves, and kind of like, it got obviously far worse than this, because they began to utilize sensory deprivation and scopolamine with the devil's breath, which is a very fascinating idea. Yeah, if you look that up, there are thousands of cases that happen yearly in South America, where apparently this is as far as like criminal enterprises utilize this, and not only a criminal enterprise, but even just some individual with bad intentions could legitimately find themselves with scopolamine or the devil's breath in a powdered form. They could dose your drink, or they could even just blow it in your face. If you were to inhale it at a certain level, it would actually, you would become effectively mind controlled to the point to where you would have zero ability to resist or reject any sort of notion or idea. Like, let's say we could take you to an ATM and tell you to empty out your bank account, and you would willingly do so in a voluntary manner and have absolutely no memory of it. And so that in itself I always found very interesting, and that comes up fairly often, obviously, but I will say a great example of it is like Sirhan, who was allegedly the lone assassin who targeted RFK, right, Robert F. Kennedy, and in reality, I believe that he was unfortunately a victim of Ewan Cameron's psychic driving technique, right, and this is fascinating because it was through the Montreal experiments from 1957 to 64 where this behavioral modification research, where allegedly Dr. Ewan Cameron's patients were at the Allen Memorial Institute of McGill University for common medical problems such as postpartum depression, anxiety disorders, and they were then subjected to this driving technique and placed into drug-induced comas for weeks at a time. And there were reports that were showing that these victims, they even forgot their parents, and they believed that their interrogators were their parents. So that is how fractured their minds had become at that point. And Sirhan's defense attorneys, Lawrence Teeter was one of the individuals. He claims that he still believes that Sirhan was operating under MKUltra mind control techniques when he shot at RFK. And he says both the prosecution and defense had trained hypnotists put Sirhan in a trance on the record during the trial. And his defense teams this is so crazy because they appealed not too long ago. And the appeal claims were that Sirhan was subjected to sophisticated hypno-programming and was not in control of his actions during the committed crime. So Sirhan, obviously, he's considered to be a candidate at this point for this psychic driving technique, the system of brainwashing that Ewan Cameron made famous. And he received direct funding through MKUltra Sub-Project 68, which was the outsourcing of MKUltra to Canada. So yeah, that's exactly how the Montreal experiments was effectively carried out. And when looking at the psychopath machine and what happened to Steve Smith, which is so crazy, he was a victim of Oak Ridge, that medical facility or institution for the criminally insane, basically, at that time, which they closed the doors. Like, it's such a fascinating story. And yeah, you have like these Peter Woodcock was a serial killer who was institutionalized there, and you have other examples of these serial killers being institutionalized, but then being removed from the institution, legitimately found on the front lines training with the IDF, and then fighting with the IDF on the front lines in Rhodesia, which is fascinating. And then he returned to live on a farm with Dr. Barker, the same individual who was running the experiments at the Oak Ridge facility. And so it almost seemed as if, it's very strange. And this all tied into this kind of like German death cult, which blew me away. And apparently, I in no way was expecting that. But of course, like
the layers on top of layers, brother.
I'm telling you right now, buddy. It fascinated me. But the whole point of what I was trying to say before I went entirely off base. I'm sorry. I went schizo after I got that Bluetooth.
It's great. It's a good hook for your show, man. It's great. It's great. The people are like, what? Where do I find this guy?
Brother, I'm telling you, at this point, I'm becoming far more concerned of what they're capable of, because if my neighbor can just link to my Bluetooth that easily, who knows what the actual authorities are capable of doing if you're targeted at your own residence, which that was the point I was trying to get to, honestly.
Yeah.
Is that not only was I had mentioned James Holmes, right? Because I do think, and I feel as if, it's something that I think people have to understand is that, many of these modern mass shooting events that take place, I feel like there are so many examples now where they inevitably function while utilizing a specific playbook that seems to, consistently resurface. And it's fascinating to me how often. And this is where I became far more open to the idea of Manchurian candidates and things of that nature when I was researching the Jonestown, right? Because I really do think that Jonestown introduced me to an aspect of MKUltra I was unaware of, which was that basically after the church committee hearings in 1975, when Richard Helms ordered the destruction of those thousands of files pertaining to MKUltra, well, it seems as if MKUltra never ended, just as I believe Operation Mockingbird never ended. I mean, This is the systematic, what I view as how you control the flow of information. And you clearly have to utilize these fundamental assets in the mainstream media, to consistently run these sort of misdirected false narratives in the minds of the public for public perception purposes only. I mean, that's mainly what it's for. But it also seems to kind of like, pave a path for individuals to sort of like re-engage and fall into these preordained outcomes in terms of certain scandalous events that take place, whether it's just the kind of like intention behind what usually is the misdirection is sort of they facilitate the cover-up in more ways than one at every level. And I view sort of the Mockingbird media assets very much, well-positioned and well-established to kind of run those misdirected, false narratives. And I think a great example of that is during the Confessions of a DC Madam case, right, where Craig Spence and Henry Vincent's sex trafficking operation. It was really like basically he was running these male prostitutes, right, and it was all for Craig Spence, who's a CIA operative, and who inevitably was suicided, allegedly committed suicide, but was essentially, the way it was described, given an offer he couldn't refuse. Basically, you kill yourself or we have to kill you now because you're overexposing the network. We have to hang you out to dry. And I feel like that happens so often. Epstein's a great example of that in certain ways, I think. And but the point being is that MKUltra was driven underground at that moment. And honestly, it was what Congressman Leo Ryan's aide, William Holsinger. I use this example all the time because I feel like it was my introduction into this kind of underground network of how they consistently utilize these sort of clandestine operations, but through this kind of gladio stay behind entrenched operation internationally, to where they can kind of like operate under plausible deniability, privatize. You know, it's very strange, but I think it's again, this is the network, this is the playbook, and so it's kind of an international intelligence operation network in a certain way, right? That's been kind of shielded from, and definitely as far as like shrouded in secrecy. There's no real, you know, it's definitely you have to do a lot of digging before you kind of pierce through the veil and pull back the curtain. And so Leo Ryan, his aide William Holsinger, which Congressman Leo Ryan was like a watchdog for the CIA. He was a radical congressman at the time, and he was hunting down leads regarding MKUltra facilities and these various institutions that were being utilized, and during the major, at least he believed, he was involved in Patty Hearst's trial. He was involved in that investigation, claiming she was a victim of mind control, and also he went to the facility where Donald Cinque de Vries was housed, right, which happened to be the same exact mental institution and federal facility in California that was essentially it housed Charles Manson in the early 50s. And so it was also known at this point, it's been acknowledged that it was a facility that was a part of the MKUltra operations and experiments at the time. And so it's very interesting because you have like all these strange overlapping connections between who helped procure the land at Jonestown in Guyana, where the People's Temple and Jim Jones had the, what did they call it? Revolutionary mass suicide, allegedly. Right. Well, it seems like that isn't quite the case, but yeah, Congressman Leo Ryan was seemingly, he was just showing up at Langley and requesting, access to documents. And he had even gone undercover and gone to a prison facility and legitimately attempted to see how they were treating their inmates at the time. So he was a very strange congressman, but he definitely was a thorn in the side of the CIA at the time. And so it seemed as if he was deliberately lured down to Jonestown in order to kind of, I believe it was a way to execute him and kind of, again, it very much seems as if, and according to his aide, William Holsinger, who received a call that said your meal ticket just had his brains blown out before it ever went public, that Congressman Leo Ryan was murdered at Port Cayume airstrip in right outside of the People's Temple Agricultural Project in the remote jungles of Guyana, right? Yeah. It's fascinating stuff. But William Holsinger gets this call, but he claims that he fears the CIA might have been running a covert operation at Jonestown that was so sinister it would shock even the most hardened CIA watchdogs. And in 1980, Holsinger claims that he had already discovered the presence of a CIA covert operative named Richard Dwyer at Jonestown and received a paper from a professor at UC Berkeley that was called the Penal Colony. And this paper detailed how the CIA's mind control program was not stopped in 1973, as the CIA had told Congress. Instead, the paper reported it had merely been transferred out of public hospitals and prisons into the more secure confines of religious cults. Jonestown, according to William Holsinger, he believed was one of those cults. So I think that in itself just provided me with a sort of new understanding of this what seemed to be a clandestine structure that was very well in place and I was unaware of, because it seemed like it didn't stop with the People's Temple. What happened just after the People's Temple in 78, right? You have effectively the Satanic Panic. It very much comes to fruition in the years after Jonestown, because you have all of these other occult organizations just propping up on the landscape,
right,
and many of which are falling under this sort of satanic ritual abuse allegations that, if you listen to the victims and you dive deep into the detailed connections involved in the cases, they seem to all connect back to sort of this trauma-based mind control affiliated with military intelligence, which is fascinating to me, because this is, in my mind, it proves this sort of state-sponsored hidden hand behind much of this abuse and these networks of abuse. And I think, unfortunately, it's been the way that they've facilitated, black market, or not black market, but basically these black budget funds for, let's say, Iran-Contra, these covert clandestine operations that they're running to essentially, manufacture crises all over the globe, and many of which, of course, if you follow the scope of Iran-Contra and the threads of that scandal, I mean, they were supplying, nation states with arms, right? Arms smuggling opportunities, essentially, through, and that's Jeffrey Epstein was a part of that, embezzling money through, Iran-Contra arms smuggling, and Adnan Khashoggi being one of those individuals, which is very strange. But anyway, it's just fascinating stuff to me, and I just think, once you understand that MKUltra never ended, then you're more willing to kind of entertain the idea that obviously much of these sort of false flags or mass casualty events that are very convenient in the timing, in the pattern, and what they facilitate in the aftermath of the legislation that's passed as a sort of precedent-setting notion, utilizing the scandalous or tragedy, right, which is very often the case. I mean, the Vegas shooting's a great example of the bump stock ban, right? I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous how they can utilize events such as this. Even Ruby Ridge, Waco, and OKC. I mean, that all helped facilitate the legislative action that led to the Patriot Act. I mean, and when you realize the dystopian totalitarian tiptoe that we seem to be on, then it's kind of like you begin to, I think, the naivete, the veil that once, kind of blurred your vision in witnessing the unfortunate reality we face here in the current power paradigm as it is structured. I've been saying for quite some time now that I truly do believe the top currency in DC for generations has been sexual blackmail and human compromise. And I don't know how
absolutely,
you can kind of be under any other impression at this moment. I mean,
mm-hmm.
It's very unfortunate, honestly, but there was something that, I discovered just recently, and I should actually finish the point I was trying to make about James Holmes, I guess, since I brought it up, but it was basically that I discovered this individual by the name of Dr. Robert Duncan, and it kind of helped kind of clear up certain ideas of what is possible today in terms of the mind manipulators and their capability, and it seems extraordinary at this point. And this has led me into, I had mentioned Monarch earlier, but I had pulled something that I thought you would find fascinating. But Dr. Robert Duncan, so he's this Harvard graduate, and he is an author who wrote this book called Project Soulcatcher: Secrets of Cyber and Cybernetics Revealed. And he explained in 2012 that over the past 10 years, he had personally interviewed more than 650 people who had claimed to have been under government mind control. Many of them said they were in Manchurian Candidate ID program free. He went to the Senate Intelligence Committee and met with 26 senators, as well as the head of the LA FBI. And after he works with a consortium of scientists on a research project for over 8 years, he provides the closest estimate he could reach, that there are about 10,000 Manchurian candidates in the works being programmed by the CIA right now that can be used at any time around the world. But he concluded by explaining that only a small percentage actually become successful Manchurians, and this allows the CIA to subvert certain international laws forbidding the agency to engage in the assassination of foreign leaders through the strategy of indirection, or utilizing agency handlers to indoctrinate individuals into these Manchurian candidate programs, self-righteously asserting plausible deniability after the fact. Now, according to this individual, Dr. Robert Duncan, a lot of these alleged mass shooters, such as James Holmes, fall into this Manchurian candidate category. He suggests one of the ultimate priorities is to predominantly manufacture consent for landmark gun legislation, largely encouraging Americans to disarm themselves. Through a combination of drugs, manipulative psychological techniques, and advanced cybernetics, they have achieved many of the goals of the CIA's top secret program in human behavioral modification. He explains that the modern day technology does not require brain implants, although they do work very well, but they seem to rely much more on post-hypnotic suggestion, which I did find that fascinating as well. I think that's a very important aspect of this, because so very often, especially in these sadistic child trafficking operations that utilize these strange kind of trauma bonding mechanisms of the trauma-based mind control, which fall under the Monarch umbrella. Man, so many of them, right, are legitimately, like, it's unfortunate, but they are utilizing these exact same. They have hypnotic, like, they basically have manuals on hypnotism, right? Hypnotism manuals that are found at their residences. Not only was that in the case of Marc Dutroux, right, where he has all of these books on mind control, hypnotism, various things of that nature, and also it was David Ferrie, right, who ran the Civil Air Patrol unit that Lee Harvey Oswald was a part of as a child, who also was affiliated with that Civil Air Patrol in Louisiana, was Barry Seal, who became the pilot for covert operations later on, flying in drugs for Pablo Escobar in Mena, Arkansas, was caught with George H.W. Bush Sr.'s personal phone number on speed dial in his pocket on his cell phone when he was executed. Yes, dude, it's crazy stuff.
Wow.
And Barry Seal was also in the Civil Air Patrol as a young teenager, who met Lee Harvey Oswald and worked for David Ferrie, who was allegedly running Project Monarch through Tulane University. All right, he was running a part of MKUltra through Tulane University at the time, which is very interesting to me, honestly, when you look at what he was alleged to have done to Lee Harvey Oswald. It's so nuts, man. I mean, they claim that he potentially had hypnotized Lee Harvey Oswald and then sexually abused him, right? Which they said he had done to multiple other members of the cadets in the CAP, right, the Civil Air Patrol. Mm-hmm. And yeah, when you look at kind of what David Ferrie was affiliated with, it is very sick to witness, but he definitely looks very similar to that of Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, by the way, which is, that's an insane story as far as what Michael Aquino was up to. As the Lieutenant Colonel in military intelligence, I think he was a key operative who was also associated and affiliated with running Project Monarch through Offwood Air Force Base and various other military bases. The Presidio in San Francisco was one of them. The West Point scandal happened around the same time. But Michael Aquino's everywhere at this point. He's in the pink ballet castles while he's going out and on his UN diplomatic missions, right? And he's effectively participating in these high society aristocratic parties called pink ballets in these old Nazi German castles, where with these like strange occult parties that they called the Pink Ballets, and they were affiliated with the Marc Dutroux network, and it was all rigged up with sexual blackmail, basically audiovisual blackmail, right?
Oh wow.
And yeah, fascinating stuff.
No
But
way.
he himself was named by Paul Bonacci and Noreen Gosh, as far as that's concerned, which, obviously Noreen Gosh is the mother of Johnny Gosh, and and that's a fascinating story as far as that
Yeah.
case itself.
Yeah,
But
I think there's so many connections too with what took place during World War II. Obviously, I'm bringing up Operation Paperclip. We brought a bunch of these scientists over to the United States. They were deeply rooted in the Thule Society. There was a lot of occult background with their
yep,
practices, not only with excelling their military, but they were also working on other kinds of projects. And I don't think we've been really disclosed to that kind of information just yet. Maybe it'll come in the future. Maybe it won't come at all. But I can kind of draw these conclusions by seeing the symbols, seeing the affiliates, knowing the people, right?
right,
And I like to give like an illustration, at least a visual illustration of the concept that we're talking about. And I use movies to do it. Born Identity, Manchurian Candidate with Denzel
hmm,
Washington, and the movie Get Out. There are these tactics that the occult is able to use, um, and they're kind of behind a lot of projects. You just have to, weasel your way in there and find the rabbit trail of that. But usually
right,
it's there. It could be in different forms. Hypnotism, channeling, remote viewing. It's just so don't just hidden knowledge and information, right? That goes back thousands and thousands of years ago when you really kind of do the research and the just understanding the scope of it. And
right,
there's it's interesting what kind of makes me think today what we're living in is we're living in a modern MK Ultra reality, and I say that because I think that I don't think, but I know that videos and audios were used in MK Ultra programming. And what do we have today? We have social media today. We have 6 second. It went from Vine, right? Vine was what 8, 9 years ago, maybe. It took, it took off, right? People, the dopamine. You already know that there was a psychological just something psychological behind short videos. Now it's pretty much everything. Everyone's using it today. Everyone's on it for hours and hours and hours during the week. And who really knows how that's affecting the psyche at a
oh man,
molecular level, at a chemical level, right? Because that's how our brain works. I'm a medic. I don't do a lot. I don't have a lot of experience in the behavioral or psych unit, but I have experience of running calls with these people and running calls on these people. So I know kind of what they're fighting again. They're fighting something.
yeah,
If it's either voices in their head or whatever, but what caused that, and there's some sort of trauma and breakdown, like what you were saying, and we know that MK Ultra was working on that, breaking down the mind to open up the consciousness, and who knows if it's either to I think it has two. I think they found out two things that they were able to do when they break the mind down. It's that they could gain control and manipulate the mind,
right,
and that they could let things in, per se. I'm a spiritual guy. I think the world is more spiritual than we think, and really, if there's entities and things that are out there and a part of our reality, I just look at history and the cultures that were here before us. They talk about all of these things, and it makes me think that are they if they have deals with these things, if they're working with these things, if the occult is rooted in communication and trying to build relationship with these things, it seems like these things also crave flesh for some reason,
oh
right?
yeah,
If it's a
buddy,
disembodied thing, it obviously it wants to explore and live the pleasures that we have. So I'm wondering if there's something with that, with and with us living in the modern day MK Ultra. on TikTok, social media. Everything's a short video clip. It's
right.
How can I say that if someone is broken and traumatized so much to the point just from the algorithms or whatever, maybe the algorithms targets certain people. Maybe it targeted Nicholas Cruz, right? Nicholas Cruz
Oh man, I
was
think you're
the
right, buddy.
I got a story to tell you, my brother, because that's the high school I went to. First of all, folks,
No
Nicholas
way.
Cruz is the Valentine's Day massacre shooter of the Parkland High School called Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. I went there for 3 years out of my 4 years of my high school little career. Played baseball there. It's a very high-end baseball school. My dad played professional baseball, so I was only trying to follow in his footsteps, and I decided to go to one of the best schools in South Florida. What's interesting about this story and how he has a connection with my life, right? And I don't even know the guy,
Yeah.
but my dad worked at a delinquent school, right? So delinquents are pretty much people that either get detention so many times they get kicked out of their school, or they get suspended so many times that they get kicked out of their school, but they have to still finish their GED, and they have to, if they don't have parents to homeschool them, this is the next opportunity that they can go to finish their education. And so Nicholas Cruz was in my dad's class.
Wow.
Okay. So he's in my dad's class, right? The shooting took place in February. My dad reported to the school after he didn't show up for 3 weeks, right? So there's like a certain time frame that if the student doesn't show up to class anymore, you need to report it, because then they got to go and do investigations and try and like, where is this kid? Because there's, they can be worried about what is he trying to do? Because really the kids they're broken kids, right? They come from broken families, whatever.
Absolutely.
They're not, their ethical and moral values they're not up to the standard, right? So my dad reports it to the school, says, "Hey, Nicholas, hasn't been showing up to class, and there's this is a problem." So what do you know? No one could. He was off grid. 2 months later, he shot up the Parkland school. And so the FBI went into my dad's class not too much longer after that, and retrieved all of his work, his portfolio, his folders, his information, everything. And as my dad was getting that stuff together with them, it's funny because he can see the things that he's got. And my dad wasn't a nosy guy. He's not going through people's work unless it's something he has to grade, right? But there was pictures that that Nicholas was drawing, and it was demonic, devilish, and evil illustrations. And who knows what was going on in his mind? Who knows what was talking to him, and maybe who even knows if we're seeing something at a level to where we're dealing with frequencies, right, all over the place, right? I mean, I got 5 lights around me. There's frequencies flying through this room like crazy, but is there like a trigger point, right? So what I mean is if you've seen the movie Manchurian Candidate, there was always a trigger point. It was something to set the ritual, or to detach the person's mind from their body, and then they were able to be controlled. And that could be a light, it could be a word, it could be a click of something. It's a noise, a frequency. And so who knows if we're dealing with those kind of things today. I wanted to hear your thoughts. Like, do you think that, with all everything I said, do you think, like, I'm not, my family doesn't think I'm crazy, right? Like, I think this is like real. I think this is real.
Oh, absolutely. I'm telling you, like, the story of Sirhan under hypnosis, but everyone makes this strange connection to the woman in the polka dot dress. Now, there was a reason for this, right? Because that is exactly what has to happen when you're under a hypnotic trance. When you're given your trigger mechanism, right, that's very much been set into your subconscious mind through the alter process, basically through setting up these alters, is what they call it, through this split personality, DID, dissociative identity disorder. And this is all effectively achieved through the process that they've sophisticated. I believe Sirhan was was, as I mentioned, through the process of psychic driving, which, as I mentioned as well, where they could legitimately plant. First of all, there were stories of some of Ewan Cameron's victims legitimately like forgetting they lost all of their adult personality and were legitimately brought back down to, they claimed, under a 5-year-old level of actually social ability and skills, and the way that they were able to, and this is a grown woman at the time, and so she had to spend years of her life redeveloping an adult personality because of how much she had been deliberately, it's very interesting because they can plant various ages to the identity of the altar that they implant in the subconscious mind when they fracture your brain. It's very strange. This is the interesting source that I pulled for you. Legitimately, I'm so happy you brought it up because it fits perfectly into this strange spiritual context to it all, where it's definitely as if this is supernatural at a certain level, right? Which in my mind, plays perfectly in line to the idea that we'll get into it because it's very strange. But as far as Sirhan, I believe that what happened with him personally, you had to have a visual trigger, which was the polka dotted dress, right? Then you had to have the scent of her perfume, which was known at that time. So she was married to a CIA operative. Yes. So you have to have every single aspect of right, your size. Yeah, your sensory is a sensory overload that triggers you effectively and puts you into the altar. And so basically they had, there's a sense of touch. So she touches him behind the ear. She whispers something in his ear right as he is triggered and starts shooting what I believe to be a pistol full of blanks, because he was actually the distractionary tactic when Thane Eugene Cesar pulled the trigger point blank range directly behind RFK's, I believe it was his right ear, but maybe it was his left ear, one of them, I can't remember now. But it makes much more sense that this would have been the case. And something was in the coffee, because all he could remember was especially when both the prosecution and the defense put him under hypnosis during the trial, all he could remember was he would say coffee, 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 right? And then yeah, it was very crazy. He gets into he first writes, this is so strange. Sirhan, right? He had been very cooperative at the beginning of the trial in '69, but he claimed to have absolutely no memory of anything that happened. And so he had a genuine sense of amnesia that no one at the time could seemingly understand, right? They could not make sense of this. And a professor by the name of Dr. Bernard Diamond, he's an expert in psychology, and he decides that he's going to put Sirhan into a hypnotic trance in order to have him relive the event under hypnosis. This is so crazy because he walks him through this, and it's very strange. He basically tells him at one point, he's like, he essentially leads the witness under hypnosis. He's like, you're shooting him, Sirhan. Like, you're talking about RFK Jr., right? Like, it's so crazy. But beyond that, you can actually watch and listen to some of these strange moments where during the trial, Sirhan was under hypnosis. And so this is a great example of that, because apparently, well, he first asked him, who was with you when you shot him, right? So already we're establishing that he had shot him, but that's anyway, to say the least. I think that's a misleading. But so Sirhan wrote on a piece of paper while he's under hypnosis, being asked these questions: "Girl, the girl, the girl," and then his only other recollection was of being choked by someone on a table in the pantry, and so then Sirhan, he couldn't recall shooting Kennedy. He couldn't remember even writing anything about wanting to kill him, which he has a journal that was discovered and made public during the trial, where he says RFK must die, RFK must die, RFK must die. It looks like it's his programming manual, where he's legitimately, wow, yes, dude, yeah, it's so crazy. And it looks like he's practicing his programming while he's potentially in a hypnotic trance. It does seem to be the case where it's potential reinforcement I'm not sure psychologically, but either way, reading through it is strange. And so beyond that, he's still in a trance, and he starts to scribble on this piece of paper. When he's asked why he was doing this, right, he wrote practice, 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 and then he says it 2 more times. But the professor says, practice for what? Mind control, mind control, mind control.
Oh my
mind
God.
control.
Dude,
Sir
I'm
Hunt
getting, like,
says,
chills, bro. That's so wicked crazy.
isn't it crazy? So Diamond, he then he decides that, well, he had multiple sessions with Sirhan. And so he used this technique that he called post-hypnotic suggestion, which, if you remember what Robert Duncan just I had mentioned, he had said, is that this was, the most effective way to kind of trigger these individuals. And so this was allegedly to implant instructions in Sirhan's mind. And so he's doing this as an expert in psychology and hypnosis and criminology as well. And he's doing this because he wants to see how suggestible Sirhan is, which to him would effectively implicate and allude to the idea that he had been severely, put into hypnotic. At the very least, he had been under hypnosis many different times in the past, if he were to be as suggestible as he was concerned was the case. And because apparently this, it would make sense that you've had prior programming, and so you would be far more open and available to being triggered in that process. And so he decides during this additional session that he's going to post in this post-hypnotic suggestion, he's going to implant these instructions. And so basically he says, you're asleep now. And when you wake up, I'm going to take my handkerchief out, and you're going to feel that you're going to climb around the bars of the cell like a monkey. This apparently worked like a dream, because as soon as Diamond took out his handkerchief, Sirhan started climbing up the bars of the cell all the way to the ceiling and perched himself up there. Afterwards, he had no memory of either being hypnotized or performing the monkey routine. Like, that's, to me, dude. You find out later that this man by the name of Jerry Capehart, he told his son that he had worked for the CIA on mind control experimentation in the 60s. He also happened to be married at the time to a woman by the name of Elaine Neal, who, according to her third husband, on the anniversary of the assassination every year, she would pull out a box on top of her cabinet and wear an old white dress with black polka dots.
What?
Isn't that crazy? Right?
Wow.
I mean, that part, that right there, to me suggests that what they've been able to accomplish is far, and the way that I described it in the episode, far stranger than fiction, right? Like, at this point, like, the Manchurian Candidate, as you mentioned. Now, originally it was written by Richard Condon, right? And then adapted into film, directed by John Frankenheimer, which has, like, Frank Sinatra, right? All these, man, it's an amazing film. I played a part of it in one of my, I think it was my Omar Mateen episode. Now I can't remember. Is one of the recent episodes, which was essentially about a programmed assassin. And basically, it's fascinating because there's a scene where the individual who has been programmed is put to the test and effectively triggered to murder and execute on the spot. Right. One of the other members of the experimentation program, right? And one of his fellow I forget what position that they held in the military, but they were obviously members and affiliated, and so they had known each other, right? And with no emotional attachment whatsoever, right? Completely robotic, just walk up under complete instruction and shoot your buddy who's smiling, who's also under some sort of hypnosis in a way, and shoot him at point blank range in the face, in front of an entire audience of these individual signs. It's like amazing stuff, but so this is crazy because John Frankenheimer, right, who adapted the film originally in 1962. Now consider that timing. 1962.
Wow.
The killing of the King ritual in Dallas would take place not very long after in 1963, which is fascinating to me. And so what had happened was that there's a story. Now, obviously, the plot is a story of a covert communist plot to kill the president. And Frankenheimer had originally sought out JFK's approval of the film due to this heightened state of the political climate in America at the time. Now, he says that Jack urged him to follow through with the project and to just disregard that and follow through anyway. And so by November 22nd, obviously, he's assassinated. But the film, it's pulled out of circulation until 1987, 25 years later. The original film was basically pulled out of as it was being circulated by the production companies at the time. It was effectively just kind of like memory hold in a way, which I thought was very, very interesting until it was remade, obviously. But what was fascinating is that Peter Levenda, right, who wrote Sinister Forces, he says that 5 years later in 1968, Frankenheimer would in fact be giving a dinner party for Robert Kennedy. Okay, so attending this dinner party is Robert Kennedy, 4 of his children, and his wife, as well as Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. And within 24 hours of this dinner at Frankenheimer's house, Bobby Kennedy would be assassinated. Now, Sirhan was implicated as being at parties arranged by the Process Church, a satanic cult organization with intelligence ties, at the Tate residence, which to me is crazy, considering the level of ties that obviously Manson has now that I was unaware of to the Process Church and Brother John Ranieri and these strange occurrences that happened. Yeah, it's very interesting, but it turns out that Robert de Grimston, that was the founder, him and Marianne McLean de Grimston, who founded the Process Church of the Final Judgment, personal friends with L. Ron Hubbard, members of the Church of Scientology before they had done this.
Wow.
I believe that...
See, there's always like this mafia, right? Behind all of these things.
Yep. I 100% agree, buddy. And I'm telling you that, like, what I think to be the case is that it was crazy because Manson himself was asked about Robert de Grimston, right? And it's very fascinating because he essentially was using the same name as Robert de Grimston was at the time, which is very strange. And getting into that is a whole nother level of, like, because that comes up in the Ultimate Evil, the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And I'm telling you right now, that Maury Terry book is one of the most fascinating things that I've ever discovered, and it sent me down this path of investigation and this sort of rabbit hole that I was very entirely, it felt unexpected, but it also felt like it removed the veil in a certain way and exposed the true sort of structure of the network and how it kind of functions, how they facilitate the cover-ups as well. But also it's like, it's hard to come to terms with, how much the leadership organically and authentically believed in the theological doctrine, in a way, the esoteric New Age ideological doctrine they were imposing on the initiates, how much they organically and naturally believed in and practiced these belief systems and core values, and how much they exploited it at a certain level. Now, that's what I'm always attempting. I don't know the answer to that. You know what I mean? And I do definitely believe that there's a legitimate group that practice these things and are devout in their belief system, But considering the Manson connections to the process, that's what blew me away, because Manson himself, he was affiliated with the Renegade OTO Lodge, which connects clearly to Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, the same network we're discussing at this moment. And you know, all of these you know, celebrity personalities were very much in the mix, especially understanding the Laurel Canyon context to it all, and kind of like the birthplace of the hippie movement. It was all a CIA psyop. It was an operation to effectively control and steer culture, and also entirely undermine any real authentic anti-war movement naturally actually you know, occurring at the time. But it was far more than that. These are layered operations. They're not only attempting to sort of control that aspect of it. I believe it's much more of like laying down this sort of I think it's a sophisticated soul trap in order to kind of unfortunately lead us into these embracing these new age esoteric values that plant us firmly into this inverted moral landscape. Right, to where we don't have the ability anymore to.
But it's all part of demoralizing,
exactly,
just society in general. And
100%.
I think one of the biggest things right now that we're seeing that is demoralizing society is just, for example, right? Like we're talking about MKUltra, we're talking about the use of drugs. You know, Manson was using drugs, right? Their drugs are a part of this. It plays a role, and I think it plays a key role because what do we see today, right? Today, it seems like society is just, and it has been for years, and it's always been. But since we're talking about this more, and there's more podcasts, right, that are talking about this, we're starting to see that, you know, we are the testing grounds for a lot of things, right? The society, the masses are testing grounds for what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, and, you know, just how successful they can be at certain things. And for example, you know, the decriminalization of drugs in our day to day, more states, and again, I'm not against everything, right?
Right.
But at the same time, what do I know? What do I know? Like the real pathophysiological effects of the things that, you know, mix with our biology, right? A lot of these things go back to the terms of sorcery and pharmakia and all this kind of stuff. And it seemed like the ancients really kind of knew about these things a little bit more than we do, right? We just go to a doctor, and a doctor rips up off a little piece of paper with terrible handwriting on it and says, hey, go to Walgreens, go to CVS, and go take this, right? And we're just like, yes, yes, right? And
Right.
I think that's why it's important to, right? Because we talk about the Bible here on this show, and the Bible talks about to be sober. And I'm really wondering, you know, how sober do we really need to be? Uh, right? Just so that we can hold on to the agency of our consciousness. Because we know when we do take drugs, and I've had, you know, history of it, right? Like we've all come from a interesting past, right? But that doesn't define who we are today. It's just that you know that there's a detachment, right?
Yeah.
There's some sort of pathophysiological effect with the mind, body, and the soul. And something does take place there. We can't put our finger on it, but we can smell it in the air. You know what I'm trying to say?
I agree. I think that we have no real understanding of the spiritual impact, let alone the physiological nature of the sort of like opening up neurological pathways that we might not quite understand, just in terms of changing our psychology. I think there's a deliberate, you know, we're talking as far as understanding. Now, this is what I think is so fascinating about, you know, like, for example, Project Monarch, which I found to be like one of the most fascinating aspects of this. But this is what I think you would specifically appreciate because, honestly, it begins by, well, there's a Kabbalistic mysticism aspect of the satanic ritual nature of a lot of the splitting of the psyche and the altar process for DID, right? To create these altars, which they're effectively able to create hundreds of different alternate personalities within the framework of DID, which is fascinating in itself. But what I found to be, you know, very just kind of upsetting is that this came up in the context of it was the X1 dossier, right? The Belgian X-Files, right? And the Dutroux case. And it's fascinating because Regina Louf herself, she unfortunately was the X1 victim in that case. And she had to endure some of the most sinister and sadistic kind of aspects and techniques of the trauma-based mind control, I think. And another aspect of it, I think, that is fascinating is that you sort of have the connection to the familials. There's basically many of the children who are procuring other child victims are a part of this sort of lineage. And it's something I was unaware of until recently, that many of these very well-established human, especially child sex trafficking networks, are kind of littered with these very sinister individuals who are effectively exploiting their own children, and it's sick to I mean, this just happened in a case that I just came across my radar in Alabama, that legitimately just happened, where they're utilizing a storm shelter, and at the very least, I think seven perpetrators have now been identified, but it was at first only three, and a fourth was mentioned but not named, and but now it's looking as if they had legitimate police protection, and were sadistically drugging children. And guess what? A few of the children happened to be their own, obviously, and then they were utilizing them to procure others. But yeah, when you look into this sort of Dutroux dossier, and you discover this insane reality in terms of the MPD DID, how they kind of implemented the alters. Regina Louf was the victim X1, and she says that many of her alters, or alternative personalities, still had the same age as when they were created, or how her handwriting differed depending on which alter was active. Now, it's terrible, man. She suffered extreme abuse, right, at a very early age, and we're talking bestiality, disgusting stuff, man. What the Dutroux network were doing, we're talking aristocratic individuals as well, like members of the Black Baron Benoit de Bonvoisin. He's one of the key perpetrators, who was one of the most sinister and sadistic in the network. His sexual proclivities were disgusting. It was something that you never want to even expose yourself to, because just as far as I've never in my life gotten to a point where I had to viscerally turn away from the screen because of my emotional reaction to what I knew was coming in the next sentence. Like, it was like that. It was something to where it was like, and I've had, it's like I've unfortunately, as I mentioned on NDS the other day, like we were talking, and I've gazed in the abyss for far too long at a certain level, right? And I watched a film. You brought up how, like, you kind of like to reinforce
it's for the visual learners.
No, I think it's important, right? Though. Yeah, very important, because this is why I think there is value to introducing the concept to the general public. It's so important at certain levels, because otherwise many people are unwilling to even, like, at the very least, they're unwilling to entertain the idea as being potentially a reality, right? And that alone, I think it helps sort of at the very least pave the way for them to essentially remain a little more open-minded if they've been introduced to the concept through some film that they respect and admire or something. Or it could have the reverse effect, and potentially they could just conflate it with the fictional narrative and claim, no, you're just getting this, based off of some, which I have had people do that to me, which is I think the wrong way to interpret it. But for me, I had found the film called 8mm, the Nicolas Cage film, and I think it came out in '99. And man, he's basically a private investigator who gets hired by this very wealthy elite family who have ties to the levers of power in a certain way, and basically his widow hires this private investigator who happens to be Nicolas Cage, right, and his character, to come and view privately view an 8mm film strip that was discovered in the private safe of this now dead elitist older man who had, convinced his wife was convinced she had loved him so much it looked as if she did, and she respected him, and so she was. Now I don't want to ruin the plot though, because it might not have been the true nature of how it was first kind of staged and introduced to the audience. But at the same time, he then goes and he watches the 8mm film strip, and it's essentially a film strip of a snuff film taking place, right? And now at this time, I mean, consider the idea that snuff films they've been sort of, I think they've been conflated and in a sort of an attempt to, it's a manufactured misconception and it's conveniently constructed, just the same as the Satanic Panic in my mind, as far as equating the snuff films to an urban myth as if they don't exist. I mean, people need to, it's an unfortunate, sort of fact of life, but the sinister enterprise and how it functions, people need to understand it never ends with just human trafficking, right? I mean, we're talking organ harvesting, targeted assassinations. It's far satanic ritual abuse. It's definitely, I think, it's worse than you would realize and want to acknowledge. And that's why I think it's been so easily compared to an urban myth and kind of dismissed at face value. But this is an oversimplification, and a sort of constructed excuse, right? And that in itself is a little bit frustrating for me, because it's very clear and obvious that the enterprise itself doesn't just end with child pornography. They legitimately are utilizing, like, for example, in the Atlanta child murders, this comes up because there's occult connotations to many of the ritual murder scenes, where it was very obvious that the children themselves had been not only experimented on, but then sadistically murdered in a snuff film, not only to sort of facilitate and distribute for purposes of, financially profiting off of it. For this is again another model of how they function in the network. They're using older child victims, to procure other child victims in the network, and then individuals who were essentially holding back drug profits from distributing the drugs throughout the enterprise as well, which, yeah, it's very fascinating. But they were then, murdered in the context of this filmed ritualistic styled murder on Indian burial grounds. It's fascinating. This all happened in the Atlanta child murders case in 79 to 81. But what I wanted to actually tell you, and because I don't want to get too crazy schizo, we'll get into some of it at a more detailed level, but was this insane spiritual connection to Monarch and the mind control aspect of sort of splitting these personalities into well, obviously not into two, but with Regina Louf herself, it was very sick, because she was indoctrinated with the belief that she was a nobody, right? And so she was basically, she had this her primary abuser with his name was Tony, and he was friends of the grandparents. The grandmother had basically given this sadistic the key to the house, and he would come pick up Regina Louf anytime he wanted to abuse her, and they acted as her pimps. And she was indoctrinated by Tony to believe that no one cared about her, that she was a little, was one of the alters that they referred to her as, and she was too stupid to become anything else than a prostitute, and that love is something that you never get for free. She would then be blamed for just about anything that happened to her, to the other children in the network, to her pets, which would be ritualistically sacrificed or abused in the context of the network itself. That just happened as well in that Alabama case. One of the individuals who was caught up in it was, engaging in animal sacrifice. I mean, that's what it was. And but with the context of the Dutroux network, it was far worse than that. It was bestiality. and utilizing the animals to commit abuse on the children, which was it was so sickening. But
Whoa.
yeah, I'm telling you, man.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean,
sick.
this gets really dark, man.
It does.
And not only do I think there is this satanic aspect behind most of this stuff, I also think the locations of where these events take place, I think there's even resonating significance, but of the location, the geolocation
I
of
agree.
these places, right? You mentioned Indian burial ground, right? We know that the Federal Reserve was signed on Jekyll Island or the Rothschilds house or the Rockefeller house, but that was buried, or I mean, that was built on top of an ancient baby sacrificing mound, right? And so, like, all these things, they have a connection with these spiritual locations, let's just say, right? And I think there is an aspect behind all this, behind this mind control stuff. I think there is an end goal with it. Have you ever read the book The Black Awakening?
No.
So The Black Awakening, it's written by Russ Dizdar, and he passed away. But he was a Christian guy. He talks about Revelation, and he does a huge investigation, pretty much in a lot of satanic cults. And so when he's interviewing people throughout the book, which he's shown you basically the whole transcript of all these things. And again, who knows if he's telling the truth or what, but it's all very interesting. They're talking about basically a lot of the things that we're talking about. They're talking about that in one day there will be an event that will take place that will trigger satanic super soldiers to be rogue in a way and start killing off masses amount of people, right? And so this is why it's called the Black Awakening. And so he ties a lot of that stuff in with the red horse of the apocalypse, right? The red horse being, war and death and all this kind of stuff. Just a lot of violence and chaos. And what's interesting with all of that is I'm seeing more movies coming out that are starting to show people having their consciousness taken over or detached from their body, and something else is taking over in their place, and they're going out and targeting to kill people. You can see this in zombie movies, right? It's like the zombies are no longer conscious and they're just going out and just trying to do what, right? Spread their disease or whatever it is, but they're also trying to kill you. Well, one movie that's coming out, and it hasn't come out yet, but it's called Weapons. And this movie is about a school teacher. I don't know if you've seen the trailer of it, but it's about a school teacher, and all of a sudden her class goes missing. All of the children, just from her class, go missing, right? And it's funny how children play into all this as well. And so the parents, right? There's a huge town hall meeting that the teachers brought basically onto the stage, and everyone is like, it looks like she's the city council, and everyone else is like, we need this, it's right, but it's more like, where's our kids? And she's like, I love these kids. I don't know. So anyways, the movie goes on, and you start to see that there's a spiritual aspect behind this. You start to see that there's a really dark evil that is causing these things. And as the movie's going through, you're seeing people, you're seeing the sheriff in the town, you see the principal of the school. Everyone is like, has the agency of their consciousness. And then halfway through the trailer, those specific people that the movie was showing you that they had agency over their own consciousness, they got taken over, and their eyes start to bug out really, really wide. Like they're just like sticking out of their head. They're drooling black goo, and they're running like they're doing a pose of a cross, of like a they're running like they're in a cross, and they're chasing people, and they're spreading this black goo onto other people. And the movie is called Weapons. So if you think of weapons, it makes me think of the Black Awakening, that this is a tactic for what? I mean, it could be it's a militant strategic tactic, right? Like someone
100%.
in the town is running an occult practice and is is taking over people to target other people to kill them off.
Absolutely,
and
man.
It's like they're the people that are getting targeted are the ones who are investigating the whole thing. The sheriff, the principal. I mean, it's crazy. And so I don't know,
That's
man.
so nuts.
What are your thoughts with I guess that concept, right? I'm sure the audience gets what I'm saying, and they're like, you know, oh, yeah, I could see that in Revelation playing out. But it's like, do you think at some point this is something that can truly happen in our society? We're seeing mass shootings on a small level right now, I would say. But who knows if we're starting to see hordes of these things?
Yeah, I mean, you heard the number that Robert Duncan mentioned, 10,000 up to 10,000 Manchurians at a specific time. But I personally, I agree. I think that essentially we are all vulnerable, right, to the techniques. And this is another reason why I think that it's very important to at least fundamentally introduce yourself to certain aspects of what they've attempted to achieve, and we have some sort of record of, because I think that alone might, obviously I'm not saying that you can, you know, manufacture some sort of legitimate defense mechanism that would actually counteract anything other than maybe just your sort of spiritual protection and you know, moral fiber based on your very well understood core values that you attempt to exercise. You know, I think that's probably the best line of defense that you can potentially have. But at the same time, it's like I think again, this is fascinating, and I keep bringing up Project Monarch because I think it is a window into this sort of what they are capable of achieving, and with the manipulation of the human mind in itself. And I think it's fascinating because it does become supernatural in what they were able to sort of accomplish. And this all seems like it, in a way, it revolves around this sinister demonic occult presence that they consistently, at the very least, it's always a factor. And that's what I've had to attempt to come to terms with that fact, right? With my own kind of ability to interpret why this continues to resurface and come up. And so for me, that's why it's so fascinating that you have these criminal occult organizations that are practicing satanic ritual abuse and blood sacrifice, right? That allegedly practice legitimate principles that they uphold and believe in at a crucial level. And that alone, I think it requires, clearly it requires your attention. And to me, I always try and dig further down and figure out what real role the organization, or this, you know, the unfortunate occult organization plays within the framework of the network. And undeniably, it's a crucial part that allows for the distribution, the trafficking, right, and at every level of the enterprise as well. Not only is it the drug distribution, which that came up with the Shirley McGill criminal informant witness in the Atlanta child murders case, who her boyfriend was legitimately involved in distributing drugs for the network from Miami to Atlanta and to Houston. On top of that, which to me draws in organized crime, holding hands with intelligence, because I think that's another way, right? I truly do believe that, and we can point to that in so many different ways, as far as like organized crime syndicates upholding and facilitating these covert operations and targeted assassinations on behalf of the intelligence apparatus. It happens so often. I mean, even Howard Hughes, he was given the task by Richard Nixon when he was VP to effectively set up all of these domestic black sites for plausible deniability right within the U.S. to train up these Cuban exiles in various covert operations. Now, it became far worse than that, because I think you had individuals who were legitimately being trained on how to commit targeted assassinations and cover them up by staging them as some ritualistic styled murder, or legitimately participating in a ritualistic murder, and not only was it a sort of way to misdirect the public perception, but it was also the intent of actively pursuing the ritual itself, which is fascinating because, again, it's not only one thing being achieved in the sort of the context of how you're supposed to interpret this, but it's something that, again, this is just, to me, it's another way that they can kind of, I think, drive the general public away kicking and screaming at face value, because it's a difficult task, to attempt to objectively interpret and understand, what is real and what is not, right? And I think that some people, if you just can't make sense of it, and it seems too extraordinary to believe, then their minds just turn off, right? And as far as Project Monarch, I found a source. Ron Patton wrote, basically he effectively wrote this this very interesting resource and piece on Project Monarch, and the brief history of kind of the occult nature of how MKUltra even began, how Nazi mind control was clearly evolved and utilized, and obviously the Nazi draft happened through paperclip, and clearly I believe that they were already isolating individual scientists and realizing after they had successfully interrogated them and in a way to where they were trying to vet them to see what they were capable of if they didn't quite already know what they accomplished, just to see how useful they would be and vital to moving this forward in the domestic U.S. and elsewhere, because that's another aspect of it. The rat lines post World War II, they didn't only extend to the U.S., which clearly they did, and effectively took over major industries in many ways, and at least became very prominent within the framework of that. It was also sort of if you look at the Gladio network, the stay behind networks, the strategy of tension, the destabilization as far as domestic destabilization tactics, utilizing these sort of like, neo-Nazi mercenary organizations. Very, very interesting how it kind of, it's not only the neo-Nazis, it would span the political spectrum, obviously. And so clearly they would, and that's another thing that I think people should realize, is that on the ideological spectrum of politics, like, they're consistently attempting to target each individual wherever they land on the ideological influence of the political spectrum. And I think that they're very well aware of the sort of subgroups that exist, and they will always attempt to infiltrate and misdirect in a sort of modern Mockingbird context of utilizing, let's say, just members of the alternative media landscape who are very obviously controlled assets to a certain extent, even if they're not fully aware and hyper aware of the fact that they are, being exploited and leveraged in that way, or maybe they're entirely open to be, right, and are sort of sophisticated assets that are actively understanding their role. But at the same time, that's another thing. It's always like something you have to kind of interpret for yourself in a way, but at the same time, it's something that people need to understand is a clear and obvious strategy of deception, And I think that the mind manipulators, they are always casting clouds of doubt, and
right,
and that's why I think there is a very obvious, careful, and systematic assault being waged on the human psyche. I mean, we're all, in a certain way, suffering from social anxieties, various things that we've kind of like, allowed to take root in certain aspects of our psychology, and to where we just, in terms of our current environment, the digital footprint, we're isolating from the rest of the world in many ways, where this is kind of unprecedented, throughout our generation, and it's just something that I think, when you realize the impact. And I was just reading about something called Chat GPT psychosis, and they're legitimately, I mean, they're becoming possessed by a demon in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
it's insane, man. And
Yeah.
OnlyFans models using AI chatbots.
Well, look what's going up as well, dude. Like we're seeing suicide rates go up, man. And I really think what's impacting these people is all the things that we're talking about, right? This social engineering and how we're living today. It's not what we were built for. We can adapt to anything, right? We're humans, baby. We have dominion over the earth, right? But my thing is I don't think we're supposed to be iPad kids and then growing up and
Right.
then getting a real job in the world, right?
No.
And I see the young generations today, especially at work, and how they act, how they think. Critical thinking skills are lower. IQ seems to be lower. I've seen a guy open up I've seen him open up a biscuit can by cutting it with a knife, and I was like, oh wow, that's new, dude. You just have to peel the layer here and just pop it open, man. I mean,
That's so funny.
so I wanted to ask you this question, man. Right? In the community we're in, we talk about this term a lot, this New World Order agenda, right? How do you think this plays in with all of that?
I think now, obviously, like the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School were key institutions in facilitating the rise of the current modern sort of structured system in the, and of course Yuri Bezmenov always comes to mind, right? The four stages of ideological subversion. He explained to G. Edward Griffin in 1984, which is just the perfect year to explain, the key points and how they achieve such a thing, which has completely taken root and subverted society and for generations. And many you like to. I mean, I used to point to the long Marxist march through the institutions, but cultural Marxism definitely exists. I think it's a huge aspect of why we've been sort of, there's been this sort of feminization in terms of men. And I think that is another aspect of kind of like littering the landscape by targeting the psyche of the female and clearly kind of like upending the process to where obviously men play this game naturally. It's a part of nature, but at the same time, it's like you see where individuals land in the framework and the structure of the game and how it's played. And you have the beta males who fall into the traps, right? Who are just attempting to compete with the alpha males, and you have this distorted version of reality taking shape, around us, and really just kind of. I couldn't imagine being single and attempting to kind of navigate this current landscape and environment in terms of like attempting to maintain any sort of healthy relationships. It would be, just to introduce yourself properly, it seems like I just have buddies who are just telling me that, most things are essentially, it's all dating apps and it's all just meeting up to hook up and not much more than that, right? Which when you have kind of a mentality that's beginning to take effect and at the very least be conditioned to kind of engage in that way, right? Where you have these sort of, I always admired the hard to get woman. I'm just being honest, right? It's like, because as far as in my
likes
mind,
a challenge.
Absolutely.
Come on.
And beyond that,
how else do you grow?
Right.
How else
for
do you
sure.
get better? How else do you go home and go,
Exactly.
oh man, how do I do, how could I get better? And it's competition, right?
100%, buddy. And I think when you're looking for what would make a good mother and a wife and mother of your children, I think that's like something that I always prioritized. I always thought I looked for the principles, because, it's, yeah, it's just like something that is very obviously like you're in a way, you're demeaning yourself. It's, you know what I mean? And it's like the disrespecting your own worth and to be conditioned to embrace those values. It's sad to witness, and I was a part of that at a younger age, although I always knew what I wanted. It was just like, you know, when you're partying and making a fool of yourself and making bad decisions, which some people go down that path. Yeah, it's the path of least resistance. And this is something that I think so many people, they fall victim to. And I think it's another aspect of this inability to reflect on who you've become, on what you have to offer, on, you know, and it's like so many people, they're running from that mirror of reflection, my friend. You know, they're so scared to actually expose themselves to what they know is most wrong with, right, their internal character defects, that when you know, are sort of unwilling to acknowledge them and then reflect and attempt to better yourself and become a better version of who you are, then I think that is kind of when, you know, I kind of entered a crazy end, just as far as psychological state of mind, in terms of I almost was kind of counteracting this egocentric mindset that I allowed to dictate some personal decisions I made as a younger person, and I almost overcompensated to a certain extent because I so desperately wanted to put that person behind me, you know, and so now in a way, I almost kind of like destroyed myself to build myself back up in a certain way, right? Which, so to where it's like internally, I think, you know, occasionally I'll suffer from a crisis of confidence or something of that nature, and I think it's just another aspect of, but that's natural, of course, but I think it's also an aspect of kind of like, again, being so critically aware of your shortcomings. You know, I think it does allow you to become a better person. It is the right path to be on. I think it's the right way to kind of view yourself and attempt to change for the better. But at the same time, it's a little bit of a slippery slope in terms of just like being sort of self-defeating, right? So it's like this balance that you have to play with yourself, and that's very important. You know, I really think it is. But in terms of like, just I saw that I only mentioned the Chat GPT psychosis because I found it so strange and interesting that you have these sort of different dynamics and gender dynamics that are playing out in real time, and how much the environment is shifting in a very quick, like very quickly, but still, the point I was attempting to make about Monarch and really how we are also vulnerable to these methods. And I think that you had mentioned, like, obviously there's this sort of electrical current, there's a frequency that exists in the natural world, and this can be accessed and utilized and leveraged and exploited. People don't understand that. I think that's I'm only now beginning to kind of, I think, in a certain way, understand what has been accomplished at a certain level, which again is extraordinary, but what this interesting source, Ron Patton, has to say on Project Monarch, I thought you would love, specifically because this, to me, it brought in the spiritual context to it all, right? And that was, he begins by explaining the various avenues used to control human behavior under MKUltra, and he includes radiation, electroshock, psychology, obviously, psychiatry, sociology, anthropology, graphology, harassment, substances, and paramilitary devices and materials. Then he mentions LSD being the most widely dispensed, obviously. Now, he talks about a special procedure designated MK Delta, which was established to govern the use of MKUltra abroad. Then you had MKUltra Delta materials, which were used for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes. Now, and it's crazy because there are clearly 149 sub-projects, I believe, under the umbrella. I had it pulled up because you had asked me earlier just for like a brief description of MKUltra itself, you know. And obviously, this all like arose in '72 out of the Watergate scandal when that was occurring, and Richard Helms himself was at the position of CIA director, and Sidney Gottlieb was ordered to destroy all the MKUltra papers, and that was in January 73. And the technical services staff shredded countless documents. Now, after Seymour Hersh exposed this in the New York Times article, front page in 74, that's when all of these corrupt investigations began, which were all obviously doomed from the start. They were essentially acting in bad faith, and this was all due to the CIA's destruction of its files as well, which was never acknowledged at the time. But records became available. They were all very much redacted, which always happens to be the case. And the congressional testimony, everything was deliberately, either redacted, or I think it was even at certain points in time it was deliberately sort of changed, right? The testimony itself, which I found fascinating. If it was not done publicly, and you had like a visual evidence of it, then it's very obviously, to me, you can't quite trust what was actually what was conducted in the hearing itself. But yeah, so, you had allegedly there were fewer than 6 agency brass who were involved and aware of MKUltra during its entire 20-plus year history. This is what they claim, which is obviously very compartmentalized if it's true. But the project, so highly classified that John McCone himself, successor to Alan Dulles as CIA director, was appointed in 61 and was never allegedly informed of the existence of the project until 2 years after his appointment. So the Justice Department in 76, they investigated Sidney Gottlieb's destruction of the MKUltra files. But the New York Times said the investigation was just quietly dropped. And then Gottlieb was called to testify before the Senate in 77. And he would only do so if he received criminal immunity, which he definitely received. And none of this would lead to any federal investigation into 185 researchers, the 80 institutions, or 44 colleges and universities that were implicated in the only documents that hadn't been destroyed, right? So obviously the CIA, they maintain to this day that all MKUltra experiments were abandoned. Many others believe, obviously, that due to the public disclosure, the agency was forced underground into black budget funding operations in order to continue the research unabated. And that proves out because I'm telling you, the Franklin Network ties directly into Iran-Contra because you had Lawrence E. King, who was running the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska. He was legitimately, facilitating black bag funds for, at least he was providing funds to Michael Aquino, which were deliberately, apparently financing Iran-Contra directly at the time. And now that ties in everything. That ties in the Finders Cult, because I believe the Finders Cult, basically you had members of the Franklin Network they were procuring victims through this overarching establishment that was essentially this window into the politically connected underworld. And it's fascinating stuff. And it draws in all of these cases. The Atlanta child murders case as well, which there's an Iran-Contra connection to the Atlanta child murders case, which is fascinating, through Hartsfield International Airport, or not Air Force, but Hartsfield International Airport. They were legitimately, the CIA was conducting, these covert operations, which is fascinating stuff, right?
Wow.
But anyway, so I just wanted to.
I had a question. Do you think that? So we understand there's a spiritual aspect behind all this. Do you think there's there's technology out there? What I'm kind of getting to is, like, from the movie Manchurian Candidate, right? Denzel Washington, when he knew something was kind of going on, when he knew he wasn't in control of himself entirely, he started researching, he started investigating, and at one point he just ripped something out of his back of his head or something, right? Or somewhere. He ripped out a piece of technology that was that intermediary, right? And he found it, and he was able to kind of, he knew he had dominion over himself. Do you think there's technology out there that can do this?
Yeah, I think that Tim McVeigh's dental implants are very strange, and people need to research the reality. Yeah, 100%. So Dr. Dr. Jolyon West. Jolyon Klebold was the homie that was our video editor for a time. But anyway, Jolyon West, he goes and has private interactions with Tim McVeigh, right? And this consistently occurs in terms of his MKUltra candidates that I believe were potentially Manchurians. And at the very least, McVeigh himself was conducting covert domestic operations, running drugs. I believe you had clearly, I think, domestic bombings were a part of that, obviously. But it was worse than that. I mean, there's another reason why. Why would he show up at Waco passing out flyers and pamphlets? It's like too orchestrated. It's almost, you could look at it as theater in a way of the psyop, right? And it truly seems to be. But as far as that's a fascinating. Tim McVeigh is one of the craziest stories, honestly, that you could look into, because he always tends to, as far as I'll never forget the what was it, the individual prisoner. I always forget his name, but he spent time with McVeigh while he was on death row, the death row inmate, and basically he was honestly, what he claimed was that Tim McVeigh told him that, and he would vacillate on this issue from time to time, allegedly, but this is David Paul Hammer, that's the guy's name. And by the way, Tim McVeigh, he I believe he was a sheep-dipped operative, right, who was a part of an illegal covert domestic operation, carried out the bombing on behalf of the government, and while he's on death row, he's officially requesting to not have an autopsy performed on his own body after his execution. And these autopsies are obviously typical, it's standard procedure as far as after federal executions, but his request would be granted. And this is all like he's attempting to keep his own biological father from being able to have his son's body go through the typical standard autopsy and provide him with a cause of death, and as far as like confirm it. And so according to this death row inmate, David Paul Hammer, he says that apparently he was even questioning, and he says we all should question the reality of McVeigh's execution, because he said that McVeigh would say that he was not going to be executed because an individual known as the Major was going to have someone infiltrate the execution team, and that he would be given drugs that would feign the appearance of death. And he says the CIA and other people used these drugs, and that they would be taken out, and he would be given some kind of medication that would counteract the other, that he would be rewarded for serving his country. Now, it does sound a little far-fetched, obviously, because I think this could potentially be a way that Jolly West could come in and, let's just say, post-hypnotic suggestion through that potential technique. He could successfully implant the idea and the instructions in the mind of McVeigh that he would legitimately believe that he would be given these counteracting drugs post-execution and be, sort of saved at the end of it all by his handlers from the intelligence agencies. And this was his reward for, being willing to carry out these obviously highly secretive domestic operations at the time, which were obviously what they were attempting to do through the sheep-dipped process. And that's a crazy part as far as if you I know sheep dipped is a crazy concept in general, right? Because obviously they say and it was, I think, L. Fletcher Prouty, right, who plays what was the name of the character in Oswald, or not Oswald, in Oliver Stone's JFK film, something X, the X character.
I can't remember. I'm a movie guy too. I'm upset.
He does that monologue so great though, like where he's just effectively describing to, who was supposed to be, obviously it was supposed to be Jim Garrison. What was it, Kevin? Why am I forgetting Kevin? What was the name of the actor that played Kevin Jim
Costner?
Garrison? Kevin Costner. Yeah. Thank you. And he's explaining to Kevin Costner, Jim Garrison, exactly how the CIA would conduct one how they would first of all engage in providing security for an event such as the JFK event in Dallas. Two, how there's no way the security team would have signed off on this whatsoever because of all the red flags involved in the hairpin turn, right? And I forget the degree of the angle of the turn where they would have to slow down, the vehicle with the open top at a certain, basically almost less than 10 miles per hour to where it would be the perfect moment where the triangulated fire from the kill squads that were set up. Now, they were set up all throughout Dallas. One was at, it's so crazy because I think what people don't understand is that there was even a hit squad set up at the airport, allegedly. And so JFK wasn't supposed to leave Dallas that day, and they had already had prior plots in Chicago and Miami that were foiled, right? And people don't realize they had patsies set up for those as well. Not all of them were going to be Lee Harvey Oswald. He just so happened to be the Dallas patsy. And that's something that's very strange itself because, it's fascinating. But again, I think that the triangulated fire there was just, it was clearly you had at least two hit teams that were effectively, taking out JFK at that moment at the same time, where they triangulated the fire to where it would hit at these odd angles to where that is why you have this strange like up and back, like he does what did the famous back into the left, isn't that they would say all the time, right, which was just like, dude, if you watch and then the frame missing obviously from the Zapruder film, which who was the individual who provided the resource that it was effectively Oswald, right? Who he provided the Oswald story. This is so crazy. In 1963, Hal Hendricks happened to be a Mockingbird, an Operation Mockingbird operative. He provided the Oswald story just hours after the assassination to the publications that then ran with, 100%, dude.
Oh,
it just, to
goodness.
me, it never ends. But yeah, when, I could
quick
get
for
into
everyone, like Mockingbird's the CIA affiliation with American media.
Exactly. Yeah.
Propaganda.
Man,
you just say. Just say propaganda.
it's crazy.
And it's so funny how many ties to the creator of Netflix and even other bigger platforms out there. And when you really look at it, everything's all condensed under Disney and other corporations and stuff. The JFK thing blows me away, dude. That blew me away right there a little bit. Because there's so much MKUltra connection as well with that, right? Because Jack Ruby, right?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. That's the craziest story ever, man.
That is. Who was the guy on JRE that was talking about that? I remember.
That was that was Tom O'Neill from Chaos, the author of Chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. So unfold that a little bit. Unfold kind of Jack Ruby and MKUltra.
Oh my God. So Jack Ruby's just such a crazy story. And by the way, he rented an apartment from a sadistic named John David Norman, who was running the Odyssey network that became the Delta Project after he was exposed and sent to prison. We'll get into that in a moment because he's the individual who rented the apartment to Jack Ruby in Dallas. Now, Jack Ruby has direct connections to, obviously, the organized crime syndicate, the mob in not only Dallas but Chicago. And so you have, again, I think this is where you have this sort of strange intersection where you meet this sort of, it's very interesting because I do think that obviously when it comes down to organized crime and how they effectively operate, I think there's a firm, intersection in terms of how they're utilized by the intelligence apparatus, but also they're consistently they're benefiting from this covert structured framework. And so it was, so after Ruby shot Oswald, there were a group of reporters who went to Ruby's apartment and just rummaged through his things. And a significant number of those people later happened to die under very mysterious circumstances. And Oswald was supposed to be transferred at 10 in the morning, but he still hadn't left by 11:30. The police didn't transfer him until Ruby was in position, and Ruby was dragging his heels because he was trying to get out of it, apparently. So Ruby was the mob's guy on the scene. he was the fixer, allegedly. He knew half the police department, the district attorney, because they all went to his club and got free drinks. And it's crazier than that because it comes up in Watergate, actually. The Watergate episode that I did, it comes up in the form of Heidi Reichen, and she was affiliated with so Heidi Reichen and the White House call girl, right, is basically, she was running this crazy what it was called is basically the Columbia Plaza operation. It was the Columbia Plaza Apartments that was just down the street from the Watergate facility, from the Watergate complex, and they were running these obviously these prostitutes into various diplomats and individual politicians, and effectively kind of providing them with a private line in the Watergate to order these prostitutes. Okay, and it was very interesting because she was connected back. She had just come from Dallas back to D.C. whenever Watergate occurred. So she was in Dallas during the JFK assassination, and she has links there as well. She's running an operation for this mob figure, right, Joe Nesline, and he has direct connections to the mob in D.C. and their direct affiliation with the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, who has nothing but military intelligence, dual loyalty ties. And they had like a deviant sex department at the time when all this was happening. It gets real crazy. It gets very interesting. But anyway, the point being is that Heidi has connections to JFK, and I wanted to mention this really quickly because it was she had a number of interactions with figures linked to the assassination, including Texas businessman Clint Murchison Jr., the principal owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and son of Clint Murchison Sr., the Texas oil baron, Joe Campisi, the owner of Campisi's Egyptian restaurant in Dallas, who reportedly hosted Jack Ruby, Lee Harvey Oswald, Dallas cop J.D. Tippit, who happens to be the cop they said Oswald killed that day.
Wow.
before he's discovered at the theater, which is so nuts, and others were also present at this dinner in November 21st, 1963. So this was all being hosted while Murchison Sr., the father, was hosting a party for J. Edgar Hoover, Richard Nixon, H.L. Hunt, Fort Worth millionaire Sid Richardson, and Vice President Lyndon Johnson. And Heidi's Black Book, which seemed very much like, Ghislaine Maxwell's Black Book that connects directly to Epstein networks, it included the phone numbers for Fred Black, LBJ's neighbor and close friend of Bobby Baker, and Morris Jaffe, LBJ's financial advisor. And so it's just like, to me, when you have Heidi Reichen, who is running a call girl operation under the protection of organized crime, being told that she's being protected by the CIA, while they're operating a call girl service through contacts in the Watergate complex during the Watergate break-in. It like connects back. Oh, right, right. It's fascinating stuff, and it seems as if it wasn't just an escort service. It was far worse than that, and she has ties to like Paperclip itself, which is very interesting.
Wow.
Heidi Reichen runs this escort service after leaving the army as an ex-stripper who was the mob's girl from about 1960 to when she was around like 20 years old. And after realizing she wasn't the best dancer, apparently, the mob, they put her to work at meeting prominent NFL football players to help facilitate their interest in sports betting, as well as carrying money for the mob all over the country, and at times even to Europe to make deposits in Switzerland. And she had an FBI file, and it revealed that the Bureau's interest in her trips to Switzerland as this sort of cash, mistress in a way, right? And so Joe Nesline, he was this notorious mob figure with interests all over the world, including D.C., and his wife happened to be best friends with Heidi Reichen, and all three of them were known to have made many of these trips to Switzerland together. So it gets very strange, but that's a whole nother story, because they're clearly, sexually blackmailing individuals who are directly connected to prominent establishment figures at the time in the government. And so that in itself, it's like, I mean, come on now, especially when you consider Ida Maxey Wells' desk is the desk that they had set up the call girl operation through, and that was the desk that had been strategically broken into by the Watergate burglars who, when caught, I forget, Virgilio, I forget which one it was. It wasn't Virgilio Gonzalez. I think it was Martinez. I'm trying to remember now the individual Watergate burglar who was basically a Cuban exile, right? Who basically swore allegiance to Howard Hunt at a certain level. And that was all because of Operation 40 and their connections back to the CIA kind of attempting to overthrow and assassinate Castro. And so you had like these individuals who were legitimately loyal to CIA operatives and believed, kind of looked at them as their protectors in ways, but also knew how the game worked. And one of them explained how not only did they break into the Watergate like 3 different times, one of the times they broke in, he and Howard Hunt hid in a closet for like the entire night, like well over 6 hours, where Howard Hunt, because there was an event that took place and they got stuck and had no ability to leave without blowing their cover. It's very interesting. And this is just before they were entirely exposed, but not long after it was the next break-in. But yeah, the story goes he's like hiding in a closet with Howard Hunt, who's mixing bourbon, whiskey with his milk because he has stomach ulcers from being an alcoholic.
Oh my
But
goodness.
Howard Hunt's like the craziest story ever.
That's hilarious. Smart.
I know, man.
But God.
Seriously, dude, it's crazy, man.
It is crazy, man. I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts with the Epstein list and everything that's going on?
Oh man, yeah.
Or we could just save that for a totally different show. I mean, I'm totally down either or because we're getting to we're at 2 hours, man. We're 2 hours in.
Yeah, I'm open to doing a part 2, honestly, because
awesome. Okay.
yeah, I think honestly I had a much different idea of what I was going to present today, and like I think it was going to be much more seamless for the audience. It would have been more palatable, I think. But me personally, I go a little schizo at times, and I'll remember things in the moment, and so I think we just have so much more to discuss in terms of a lot of these cases, and we can kind of hone in a little bit more directly with, like, let's just say a handful that seem to reinforce this sort of just the current, obviously, if we're looking at in terms of the context of just trying to interpret the Epstein network as it is structured, I honestly believe that Epstein has direct ties to the Finders cult, which is very strange. As far as the CIA cut out the Air America was essentially the CIA company that was just a CIA construct from its foundation, and legitimately, you have the Finders cult utilizing this airline, right? This private CIA cutout airline, while they're trafficking children, and then it's legitimately handed off to Jeffrey Epstein and Wexner, who are also utilizing the very same airline, and they just rebrand the airline. It's fascinating stuff, but Wexner himself, I think he and there's so much more to the Epstein network. I mean, obviously you have, I think Peter Nygard is very interesting in terms of being labeled as the Canada's Epstein, but if you consider, like, for example, it was Juliette Bryant, or I think it was Juliette Bryant. Maybe it's Julianne Bryant. I can't remember her name now, but she's an Epstein victim. And if you consider the claims that she made about what happened to her at Zorro Ranch, and then what essentially, the sort of, I mean, it's fascinating what Peter Nygard has even admitted on camera. What he was pursuing in terms of these sort of like biotech companies that he was funding that also seemed to overlap with the exact same. Epstein himself happened to be funding some of the very biotech companies that Peter Nygard was involved with. And Peter Nygard himself has a private island where all these women were going missing, and these young children as well, which is very strange. But But one of Epstein's victims, who spent time at the Zorro Ranch and was trafficked there at the property, she woke up one day, paralyzed one night, and naked on an operating table in the middle of the night while at Zorro Ranch. Now, all of them, according to her, seem to have, as far as all the victims that experienced this, they seem to have this blue butterfly that was essentially branded on them. And now she says that essentially the claims have been made, and she's alleging that this is all connected to Lilith, the first wife of Adam, and how harvesting eggs is allegedly a priority within Epstein's theory of eugenics. And so she woke up, and she said that this, obviously, Zorro Ranch was not far from the Dulce base, the military base, right, which I think is very notable. But she claims that she woke up and she had her eggs removed, right? And that was when she woke up on this operating table at Zorro Ranch.
You see a lot of that. Sorry, I got to cut you off, but there's so many connections with just the alien abduction phenomenon and the same exact thing that you're talking about, right? Where there's this extraction of fertilization and organs and male, female, both of that stuff. And this kind of plays into the Genesis 6 kind of narrative. So I'm sure the audience is eating it up, but go ahead, continue.
No, you're good. I just think, at least for part 2, let's start with Epstein and where that takes us in a way, because I think that will perfectly, kind of, it directly connects to Roy Cohn, Trump's mentor, right? Who I 100% believe raped Richard Kerr from the Kincora boys' home, who was trafficked to him. He's been legitimately proven to be a who ran human compromise sexual blackmail parties where young children were provided to him by certain cult organizations. And that in itself is fascinating. And it goes far deeper than that. And I think that Roy Cohn is obviously the individual who helped sexually blackmail J. Edgar Hoover at the Blue Suite parties. And later on, Trump himself would purchase that very human compromise property, right, that hotel where the Blue Suite parties were held. And then he would also happen to purchase Adnan Khashoggi's yacht, which was entirely rigged with audiovisual blackmail. Adnan Khashoggi being, obviously he was related to Jamal Khashoggi, who, if you remember, in the first Trump administration was infamously assassinated and beheaded and executed and cut up in pieces by Mohammed bin Salman, right? The Saudi crown prince, or the Saudi prince, Saudi king now, right? And so it's crazy stuff, man, because it all connects back to like Iran-Contra, because Adnan Khashoggi was basically, he was arms smuggling at the time as a Saudi Arabian citizen. He was running guns to during the Iran-Iraq conflict. And who was embezzling the funds from his arms smuggling operation? None other than Jeffrey Epstein.
Wow.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Oh,
and there's footage.
Part 2,
pictures.
People. Part 2. Let's go.
Let me. Do you mind if I say this one last part
absolutely.
about Monarch?
Tie a bow on whatever it is
you
need to. Yeah.
You would really appreciate this, because when I discovered it, it did reinforce certain spiritual connotations and brought in more of a. I think it reinforced and sort of like, in my mind, it lended credibility further to this sort of more supernatural, spiritual context to what they are able to accomplish in the facet of implementing the altars, right? That in itself. But yeah, I had begun with, essentially, we had the 149 sub-projects under the umbrella MKUltra, but Project Monarch, it officially began by the U.S. Army in the early 1960s. Now, I think it was very much unofficially implemented far earlier than that, and you can kind of point to many examples, but it appears to be, the most prominent and still classified as top secret as far as national security reasons being cited as the concern, and isn't that always the case? Yeah. National security concerns.
Right.
It's just fascinating. But so Monarch, it culminated from MK Search sub-projects, such as Operation Spellbinder, which was set up to create sleeper assassins, Manchurian candidates, who could be activated upon receiving a key word or phrase while in a post-hypnotic trance. Now, Operation Often, isn't that fascinating? That in itself, you know? And then you had Operation Often. So the Sleeper Assassins Manchurian Candidate sub-project was Operation Spellbinder. This is one of 149 sub-projects under MKUltra itself, which that just lends to the extraordinary aspect of what they pursued in the layered and tactical strategic outcome. So beyond this, you know, obviously the key word or phrase, while in post-hypnotic trance, that lends to the Sirhan representation and example that we gave earlier, as far as Elaine Neal in the polka dot dress, giving off the scent, whispering in his ear while touching him specifically at this precise moment, while he already drank the coffee with her in the pantry prior to RFK being, you know, strategically ushered through in a very quick, unorthodox way through the pantry, where there's so many people in that area that it was it was primed and ready for a misdirected sort of targeted assassination and execution, to where get the Manchurian who is in a hypnotic trance to, this is another reason why Sirhan was tackled to the ground, and even with the gun still in his hand, he's just fiercely pulling the trigger. He couldn't stop doing that action, as if he was programmed to commit that physical action. It was fascinating. And I know that always blew my mind when I found that out, that he just, and when he was put into the trance during the trial, they walked him through the actual assassination, and he just starts convulsing and pulling an imaginary trigger, phantom trigger.
My goodness,
it was crazy.
Dude.
I'm telling you, man. It was one of the most insane things I've ever watched. Wow. I felt so bad for Sirhan too, I'll be honest. Like, I couldn't. Now, I'm not saying that he doesn't have very, you know, suspect connections to certain aspects of how he could have been kind of the priority target to be patsied, but at the same time, we won't get into that. I'll finish this off about Monarch, kind of attaching that spiritual context a little bit deeper, and then we'll go ahead and segue to part two, right? If you're okay with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome, buddy.
Yeah.
But so basically, I just introduced this Operation Often, right, which happens to study and attempt to harness the power of occultic forces, possibly one of several cover programs to hide the insidious reality of Project Monarch. This is the way it was described. Now, the definition and description, Monarch is not necessarily defined within the context of royal nobility, but rather refers to the monarch butterfly. When a person is undergoing trauma induced by electroshock, a feeling of lightheadedness is evidenced, as if one is floating or fluttering like a butterfly. There is also a symbolic representation pertaining to the transformation or metamorphosis of this beautiful insect, allegedly. From a caterpillar to a cocoon, dormancy, inactivity, to a butterfly, new creation, which will return to its point of origin. Such is the migratory patterns that make this species unique. Now, the occultic symbolism may give additional insight into the true meaning. Psyche is the word for both soul and butterfly. Coming from the belief that human souls become butterflies while searching for a new reincarnation. This has legitimately been, I know, and for that to be sort of tied to this symbolic nature of the project itself, it does bring in this sort of mystical, esoteric connotation and context to it all. And so some ancient mystical groups, they refer to the Gnostics, saw the butterfly as a symbol of corrupt flesh, the angel of death. Now, Mangala, this is another reason you have all the strange symbology of the butterfly. And so this Gnostic art portrays crushing the butterfly in their form. And then the marionette syndrome comes into play. A marionette is a puppet that is attached to strings and is controlled by the puppet master. This is monarch programming and referred to as the marionette syndrome. Imperial conditioning is another term used. Now, some mental health therapists know they refer to it as conditioned stimulus response sequences. Project Monarch could be best described as a form of structured dissociation and occultic integration in order to compartmentalize the mind into multiple personalities within a systematic framework. During this process, a satanic ritual, usually including Kabbalistic mysticism, is performed with the purpose of attaching a particular demon or group of demons to the corresponding altars. Of course, most skeptics would view this as simply a means to enhance trauma within the victim, negating any irrational belief that demonic possession actually occurs. The altars and the triggers, another way of examining this convoluted victimization of body and soul, is by looking at it as a complex computer program. A file or altar is created through trauma, repetition, and reinforcement. In order to activate or trigger the file, a specific access code or password, cue, or command is required. This is crazy, and we'll end with an example of that in just a moment because it's fascinating. It came up when I covered the James Holmes episode.
This is crazy. You know, I just became familiar with Often, like that project. It was I think it was what is it? What's the Butterflies podcast? You see little clips of that. They've mastered the short game. But sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, you're good, buddy. Just honestly, man, this is something that I think so few people have even just entertained at all as being, or been introduced to the concept alone. I think is kind of unfortunate. But when it comes down to the way that this is being described, it makes so much more sense in terms of the abuse networks I've studied that utilize hypnotism and the strange implementation of DID to the victims, to the child victims specifically. Now, we can get into that in part 2 because Kinkora comes up, the Kinkora Boys Home, and how the reason that they utilize the blood sacrifice and the value of the prepubescent aspect of the blood. It's very strange in the occult context. It's disturbing. But yes, but there's a reason for everything in terms of, it seems as if they have sort of like, you know, at the very least, they have, I think in every way, it's more than just symbolic at this point. And I do think there's some sort of, we'll talk about the ultimate sacrifice and David Berkowitz as well, because you mentioned the, what was his name again? The mass shooting that
Nicholas Cruz.
Yes, Nicholas Cruz. Now, you mentioned the date that occurred. That's an occult holiday.
Right.
That's a satanic symbolic holiday.
So funny. We had Donut on a couple. I mean, we haven't released the episode yet, but the show before this one, we're gonna post it, and he really brought that up for the audience. You know, showing the dates, the numbers, the numerology meanings, and what it means to these people, right? Because there's some sort of I don't know. I think there's like an ether or like an energy system behind it to help them move forward with their plans. But I don't know.
There has to be, you know, you consider the concept of the geographical ley lines, the centers of power, how these very strange. These, first of all, like it seems like they're geopolitical hubs of covert operations, and it seems like much of the occult just sort of reverberates from those areas, and clearly it's I think it's far more, it's nationwide, it's international in scope, obviously,
right? But
at the same time, there are these sort of ground zero strategic hubs of influence that somehow they're harnessing. Now, I'm not entirely certain of this, but I definitely think that there is a belief that you can harness this frequency and energy to your own benefit at a certain level. Not certain exactly how you would go about, you know, exploiting a ley line, a naturally existing, you know, I'm not quite certain, but still it's fascinating to kind of like entertain as an idea. But yeah, to finish this off, because it's something that they claim that this sort of the victim survivor, they call a mind slave. Basically, you're a slave and to the programmer, the handler. And this comes up again and for one of the individual examples of one of these poor victims who definitely had gone through some sort of Manchurian-styled programmed assassin, right, technique and program, to where they had an actual trigger mechanism in place where if their handler mentioned this trigger, their entire, ability to of course, sort of, can just engage in self-control, practice self-control, is just removed from you. Right. It's like the most vulnerable you could ever imagine becoming, and it's outside of your ability to control. Like it's fascinating to consider, but the claim is that this is apparently the handler and the programmer are then, of course, they're perceived as the master or the god of the slave, the mind slave, and this falls in line with Michael Aquino and basically the mind war and the psychology of victory. And but they say that about 75% of the Monarch victims in the beginning were essentially female, and they prefer individual females for certain things, because apparently they possess a higher tolerance for pain and tend to dissociate easier than males. This is what the claim is. And so subjects are used mainly for cover operations, prostitution, and pornography. Involvement in the entertainment industry is notable. A former military officer connected to the DIA told Ron Patton that essentially, this is very strange, but in the big picture, these people, the Monarch victims, are in all walks of life, from legitimately homeless people on the street have been utilized in these experiments and then placed back in their position, and to white collar individuals, and in corroboration with retired CIA agents who were basically came together and discussed the use of such personnel to be used as plants, or what they called chameleons, for the purpose of infiltrating a designated group, gathering information, and or injecting an ulterior agenda. So that makes sense. But there are allegedly, you have inordinate amounts of alters in the victim survivors, with numerous backup programs, what they call mirrors or shadows, a division of light side good and dark side bad. So they're playing off of this sort of, the concept of morality in this very strange way. And alters are interwoven in the mind and rotate on an axis, is the way it's described. One of the main internal structures, apparently there are many, but one of them within the system is shaped like a double helix. Wow. Which that to me was fascinating. And It consists of 7 levels. Each system has an internal programmer which oversees the gatekeeper, which he suggests are demons, who grant or deny entry into the different rooms. So this is how you structure it in, the psychological aspect of implementing the alters. It's just, I think there's another way you can describe it, is the gatekeeper that's providing, this sort of axis wobble of the alters and how they are triggered. Is it really a demon, or is it, is it really a gatekeeper, or could it be, right. described in these spiritual terms? And that's what the claim is, that this is potential demonic possession in a way that you can achieve and implement in this sort of, subconscious or unconscious or just undefensible, as far as like the individual victims who clearly have no ability to protect themselves. And so this is allegedly how it functions in the mind after the implementation. And a few of the internal images predominantly seen by victim survivors are trees, like the Kabbalistic tree of life, with adjoining root systems, infinity loops, ancient symbols and letters, spider webs, mirrors or glass shattering, mass, castles, mazes, demons, aliens, monsters, seashells, butterflies, snakes, ribbons, bows, flowers, hourglasses, clocks, robots, chain of command diagrams, and or schematic of computer circuitry boards. These are all different things that have been suggested by the Monarch victims who have, been implemented with this sort of technique of administering these strange, DID personalities. But here's the last point that I wanted to at least bring to the table was it involved bloodlines and what they called twinning, which a majority of the victim survivors come from multi-generational satanic families. These bloodlines and are ostensibly programmed to fill their destiny as the chosen ones or chosen generations, a term coined by Mengele at Auschwitz. Some are adopted out to families of similar origin. Don't let me forget next time to bring up a picture of Carrie Thornley, of what Carrie Thornley believes to be Oswald's father, who was basically a part of a Nazi breeding experiment program, and potentially Oswald was just some sort of, was bred in a Nazi breeding experiment to potentially become some sort of mind-controlled Manchurian asset. It's very strange.
Wow.
But yeah, his father, there are a lot of questions surrounding Oswald's father, but I'll pull up that picture on the next one, and you have to tell me if that resembles Oswald, because it's crazy.
Oh, that's crazy, man.
Honestly makes you consider it.
That is wild. I can't wait for it.
Dude, especially considering that Carrie Thornley, who provides this, who claims that he was Oswald's brother, and he was also bred in the Nazi experimentation program, and that he legitimately pointed out the fact that Jim Garrison claims that Carrie Thornley was running, essentially was running domestic covert operations on behalf of the CIA alongside Oswald, which during that time when he was in New Orleans and working at 544 Camp Street for Guy Bannister and Clay Shaw, and that basically they were running around, as a part of these covert operations together at the time, conducting them in broad daylight. And that was a reason why Carrie Thornley was considered to be one of Oswald's impersonators, one of many of Oswald's impersonators that day, which is fascinating, and leading up to the day in Dallas. And he had been implicated because he was working alongside Oswald and knew Clay Shaw and Guy Bannister. And it's fascinating because he then founds an esoteric New Age occult religion called Discordianism. And it gets crazier than that, because Carrie Thornley not only did this, which Garrison himself says was a covert CIA construct for plausible deniability, that this cult organization that Carrie Thornley created actually was. But in reality, he had written what he claimed to be a fiction novel that came out just before the JFK assassination, and it was called The Idle Warriors. All right. And it's one of the craziest stories ever, man. I'll tell you that right now. It'll blow your mind, but we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Because I think the final point here is just that, others used in this neurological experiment are deemed as the expendable ones. So not only did you have the family bloodlines that were ostensibly programmed to achieve their destiny, and the multi-generational satanic occult familial outcome there, it seems as if you have potential generations of mind-controlled individuals who some are adopted out to families of similar origin. Others used in this experiment where they became the expendable ones, the non-bloodliners. So that's potentially why you have the individual in let's just say maybe X1 was spared due to her familial connections to the satanic bloodline, which unfortunately brought her into and introduced her to the sadistic abuse network. But it makes a lot of sense why she would age out and not be effectively executed once she did age out, like many of the other procured victims. Once they reach a certain age, they're no longer valuable to the network, and they essentially either place you into these highfalutin human hunting parties, which are definitely arranged through these underground publications, and they're almost like they basically are a subscription-based model where you pay to play, and based on your most sadistic, sinister sexual proclivity, you can essentially end up on like a North Fox Island hunting children, right, in a human hunting party. Yes, that's 100% a reality. It's fascinating stuff, but same thing happened in Kincora in terms of the family bloodline sparing some of the victims. But still, so then you have the non-bloodliners who become expendable, but usually coming from orphanages, foster care homes, incestuous families with a long history of pedophilia. There's so many examples of that. And this also appears to be a pattern of family members affiliated with government or military intelligence agencies. So I think that is really what I wanted to kind of describe more than anything that I discovered recently in terms of Monarch, because it put it into spiritual terms in a way that I had never heard it described before. And I found that to be, I don't know, it seemed like it just fit too well.
It's like confirming.
It does.
Confirmation.
It sort of, right, it reinforces what I almost kind of believed in my soul already at this moment, right? Which is just, it's sad to...
It's like you know, we straddle things for so long until it just pushes us to that one side, you know, where we're like, okay, 100%. Yeah, that's, you know, I was giving it the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, I know it to be true, right? Like there's just too much built up, too much connections, and really with all of that, man.
And I had mentioned Dr. Robert Duncan talking about Manchurian Candidate ID program free and how James Holmes was a candidate for this. And he suggests that obviously he had mentioned, you know, the brain implants and post-hypnotic suggestion works it's far superior apparently. But he says one of their goals was to create split personality spies so they could pass information without even knowing it, and even commit murder with no memory of the crime so they could still pass a polygraph test. Among the various techniques used throughout this process is something called the Voice of God technology. And even while they are sleeping, these subjects are kept in dissociative states and can allegedly be programmed with subliminal messages. Now, often these targets can be manipulated through the use of microwave hearing effects or voice transformation, such as using the voice of a dead relative to implant ideas in the subject's mind.
Wow.
And then he ends it by saying, neuroscience has become the modern battleground where war wages on over the control of the human mind. Cybernetic warfare. The 21st century will be known as the age of spiritual machines and soulless men.
Brother, listen, I really believe in that things happen for a reason, and you know, with research, because I've been going on shows more. It's been something that as a podcaster, it's something I've just taken a hold of, and I'm like, you know what, I am a researcher. I do nothing but you know go to my job, you know, when I need to, and be a dad and be a good husband, but I podcast, and I've been in the realm only for 7 months or so, but I'm like, I need to take ownership of the things that I love and that I love to specialize in, just like you, brother. Like, you're great. You are.
Thank you, man.
You really are top tier. One of the guys in the community that is just really good at what they do, and so as I've been going and finding research on the topic that just God's put on my heart to sift out, to cipher, and or decipher, and to try and just bring it to the public in a different way is something. Ever since I became a Christian, and I've always been interested in this mark of the beast, right? Like, what is the mark of the beast, right? So it says in the Bible that if we don't have it in our body, we can't buy and sell. But then when you look at the other parts of Revelation during the judgments, the bowls, the wraths, this is what's happening to the earth with with the Antichrist in the world. People of the world have this mark of the beast, and there's a lot of war going on as well between believers and what is taken habitation and ownership, what has taken dominion over the earth. There's like a war between good and evil. And what's fascinating is getting into the patents, getting into the technology realm, and especially biomed, right? Because we mentioned biomed. You mentioned biomed on this podcast, and we've been talking about that there's spiritual implications clearly behind what's going on. And I've come to the realization that there is technology out there, right? And this is from just research, that that it wants to take your agency away from your consciousness. Why? Because that's how we make decisions. Well, what's the biggest decision that we could make? Well, what do we believe in, right? Everyone kind of goes around this world and walks this earth with that question and that curiosity in their mind at least one time a day. Like, what is this, right? And what am I going to choose to believe? There's many different avenues and routes that we can take and choose, and that's everyone's liberty. Like I love that, right? And finding some, I would love to share some of this, another show or something, or whenever. But there is technology out there to where it has principles and it has capabilities and properties that can detach you from your the agency that we have. People are like, don't understand really what I'm saying. Like, you can play the back seat driver, but who is really in the front seat? And as I've gone through my journey, having you on the show right now and having other people on in the show, there's so much confirmation to, like, I'm really, you've really brought to my attention that a lot of this is MKUltra grounded. It really is.
Absolutely.
MKUltra is it's just going through a course of evolution, and it's like getting faster and stronger, and it's mutating, right? If anything, it's hard to catch up to right now. But we're on the trail, right?
Right.
Austin Wade Picard is on the trail, people. Oh man, dude, what a show,
Thank
bro!
you, buddy.
What a show, man! Thank you so much, man.
Of course,
I felt it in my heart to start this podcast thing, to really take it full time in a way, and to go hard after it. 6-7 months ago, I came from, being a listener to you. I came from being a listener. I remember hearing you on Sam Tripoli's show, and I was like, man, this guy's crazy. And then, same thing with NBS and all these other guys. And now I've got you in the studio, and it's such a blessing, bro. It's crazy. It's fanboy moment for me, believe it or not. I know I'm pretty humble about it, but I mean, it's a lot of fun, man. You freaking killed it this episode, and I'm sure the audience is like gonna go back and play this for another download, because the second time is always better. We always know that, especially with movies and podcasts. It really is, man.
right.
But I tell you what, if you're all done tying a bow on everything you wanted to, I wanted just to ask you that first before we move into the next segment.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I just for me, the last thing I really had to say was basically, one, I can't thank you enough for what you just said. Those kind words mean everything to me, honestly, brother. Like, I started my podcast because I felt so isolated in my ideas. I was just kind of, again, it's just, when you feel like, it's almost as if I got into this moment where I was just kind of pacing in the front room and just like regurgitating so much information while pacing back and forth to my wife after she gets off work.
Shout out to the wives, by the way.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I have to apply this to something, that I view as worthwhile for my own sake, at the very least. But beyond that, it was like I was on this path of attempting to kind of interpret the power paradigm for myself, and through that, and I'm telling you, it was something where now I wasn't thinking in the most spiritual of terms when I began this process. And man, throughout objectively pursuing the truth, I feel as if just through applying yourself in that process, you find God. I swear there's something to that. Through the objective pursuit of the truth, you somehow discover the spiritual outcome, the true nature of what is at play here. This is a spiritual battle. Your soul is at stake, right? And like, it was just like, when I started this, I never could have imagined that I would have like kind of, just again, the relationships that I've kind of, made from day one. It makes all of this worthwhile, because once again, it's like the nature of sort of forming a community around you, it's I think it's very important. Not obviously, I think there's an aspect to that in your own personal individual lifestyle. You obviously need to have, I think, a family, and that will lead to feeling less isolated in certain ways, but you will always need some sort of like connection to like-minded individuals that make you feel a little less insane when it comes down to the interpretation of this specific power paradigm and the unfortunate oppression and abuse and the individual victims that I, for myself personally, like, once I discovered the reality, the credibility, the corroborative evidence that exists, I could not turn a blind eye any longer. I feel obligated to consistently spotlight these stories, because who am I with my privileged existence, to just bury my head in the sand because it upsets my delicate sensibility. It's like, consider what people who never had a chance and were thrust into these environments that you can't even almost conceptualize for yourself. Try and put myself in those positions as much as I could. And it makes it to where, I kind of mentioned it before, there is an emotional toll in a lot of this research that definitely it rises to the surface at a certain point if you're not balancing out, the things you're exposing yourself to. You can get too bogged down in the disturbing details at a level to where, and I'll be sitting there doing research for hours on end and legitimately convincing myself internally, I'm unaffected, I'm fine. This is fine, I'm okay. And then there's a turning point. There's a moment where it boils over, and the emotional consequences come to light. And there's a toll. I think I described it at one point as, I never resurface whole. I feel like I lose a part of myself in certain aspects of these cases, and that's terrifying. And so it's something that I've tried to attempt to embrace a mantra where I'm very grateful, because I am extremely grateful for the position I find myself in at this moment, the people that I have surrounded myself with. Look at the good things in life, remember and remind myself what is most important. But at the same time, it's like you have to pivot away for your own well-being at certain points. And this is another reason why I've been telling myself my next episode won't be about some sadistic child trafficking operation, because I can't stomach it for at least a couple of episodes. But I think it's just important, have a little bit of balance, because again, David Raven, the other day on NDS, Top was like, are you having fun? And I was like, thank you so much for asking that question, because I legitimately, I pray before I do any interview, and I just, I've embraced this sort of mantra in my prayer where I ask for my intentions to be pure, my heart to be in the right place, and my mind to work efficient and effective. And then I've been adding to this, to where I now have been recently just asking to enjoy the conversation, have a good time, have some fun, and I think that it is important to try and, I know it's very important to spotlight a lot of these issues, but we have to at least attempt to, shine a light into the darkness in a way, and not prioritize focusing only on the negative outcome and the disturbing details of the reality that we face. And I think that's steering away from the black pill in a certain way, because I think it's very important to do so, right? And considering the mind control aspect of it all, and losing free will, like that in general is happening to so many people. And unbeknownst to them, it's sort of the subconscious framework of the deception playing out in real time. And they're no longer in control of their thoughts. They no longer can even, honestly, consider the average person. If you try and drill down and ask them to describe, their ideological influence, what they truly do view as their moral core principles that they value, and they'll grow upset, because they have yet to truly identify them for themselves. And that is why their soul is vulnerable in this moment, because their morality and ethical principles are up for sale. It's wherever way the wind blows. And that is a problem in terms of the level of influence being sort of leveraged against us at every level of modern society. Right. And so that is where we fall into the preordained outcomes and the very strategic, socially engineered traps that have been set for us. And we lose our free will. We cannot come to the table open-minded any longer and engage with ideas in a realistic and authentic and objective way, to where we can have these conversations with people in our own families and at a certain level, right? Because it's sort of like, are you willing to put them in the position to where you could potentially lose a relationship, burn a bridge? That is happening in so many different families, and at this very moment, and I believe it's by design. It's legitimately, and so anyway, the final point there is just that, when I did the James Holmes episode, it was crazy. I discovered this poor woman, this victim, that her and her sister they had co-authored this book. It was called Secret Weapons: How Two Sisters Were Brainwashed to Kill for Their Country. And her name was Lynn Hersha. And Lynn wrote in the book, "What angers me is the loss of control. At any moment, someone could come to me, be dressed the right way, use the right code, and I no longer have free will. I will do anything that person requests. I hate them for that. Nothing else is as bad as knowing that I am always out of control, knowing that I am still a laboratory experiment, a puppet whose strings are hidden from everyone but my handlers, and I don't yet know how to break free." And it just it further reinforced the idea that we caught a glimpse of this sort of careful and systematic assault being waged on the human psyche, right? And it's multifaceted. Eliminating our self-determination and shattering the very concept of free will, man. I mean, that is what we're experiencing.
Right. And I think too, just from the Christian perspective, I mean, when we look at the adversary, right, there's many different titles: Satan, Lucifer, the devil, many different things, but really his job is like a lawyer, right? So he watches you throughout your life, and he continuously goes to and fro from the earth to heaven, constantly going back and forth and going, "Don't you see what he's doing? Don't you see what he's doing?" So right. when I understand that from the scriptures, it's just he has morals, right? He does. But not only is there a hive mind concept between the New World Order, Revelation, the Antichrist, and all these other concepts, they all kind of do tie in together and play in together. But he's after your consciousness. He's after the agency of it. Why? Because he knows you can still make a decision at the end of the day for your soul. And that's the biggest thing, right? That's the biggest thing. And brother, I appreciate you so much, man. You came on, you absolutely crushed. I want to just take a little bit of time and let's talk about your platforms. Let's talk about your shows, and where the people can support you the most.
Thank you, brother. And again, this is what I love so much about kind of, being able to pursue, just have the, again, the whole reason behind the podcast was to have conversations like this, right? Meet individuals who were so very obviously unplugged from the current system and thinking for themselves, right? The critical thinking skills. It's, I encourage everyone, every single thing I said, go make sure you cite these sources. It's legitimate to me, and I only bring forward what has very much proved to be compelling personally, and kind of, I think, convinced me otherwise in terms of the alternative theories involved in so many of these ridiculous scandals or cases that, they've been effectively covered up at an extent to where what we've taken at face value as the mainstream version of things is an obvious misdirection. And that in itself is the reason why I love the ability to kind of come bring ideas to the kind of like, what is it? I forget what the term is as far as like, but either way, the idea is just to be able to kind of bring forward and present these kind of very much underappreciated, kind of like additional layers to these very much, I believe, consequential cases that still to this day have sort of, it's only providing more of a window into how the current structured paradigm consistently remains in the shadows. And I think that it's up to individuals like ourselves to kind of like be willing to put our credibility at risk by just discussing things in an objective way. I find it fascinating that people are so concerned with remaining credible. I'm not acting as if I'm not concerned with that. I do definitely hope to, thoroughly exhaust my resources to the point to where and this is a reason why I mentioned the fact I only bring to the table what has thoroughly convinced me otherwise, because so much of what we're trying to navigate through is just misinformation, disinformation, layers of deceit. And so, as I said in the Psychopath Machine episode that I covered, I described it as, and I mentioned Oak Ridge earlier and Steve Smith, I described it as our current reality is far stranger than fiction in every way. And that includes programmed assassins, Manchurian candidates, secret government programs, manufactured mercenaries. And I think that the way that John Ronson put it in the psychopath test, as I mentioned earlier, it kind of put it into perspective for me personally as far as what I was attempting to break through to witness for myself firsthand, which was essentially just consistently find these windows of opportunity to expose these networks of operation, how they conduct themselves. But that is, as John Ronson wrote in the psychopath test, suddenly madness was everywhere, right? And I was determined to learn about the impact it had on the way society functions and evolves. Psychopaths make the world go round. Society is an expression of that particular sort of madness. I've always believed society to be a fundamentally rational thing. But what if it isn't? What if it is built on insanity? And I just thought it was the perfect way to describe this psychopath machine and mind control in general, and how our current society is truly structured in this socially engineered way to embrace the inverted moral landscape. It's a fundamental flaw in the nature of, first of all, not understanding and being able to deliberately interpret the reality of the exploitation of the God hole. And I think that's what happens to so many people, right? The God hole exists and they have to fill it with something. And so they're desperate, and their attempt always inevitably becomes some form of a new age esoteric ideological system of control. Whether that is at surface level and in the political spectrum of political parties and political puppets, so be it. Or whether it's, some other fundamental justification that you're attempting to obviously, just internalize so that you can move forward in a way to where you can feel as if you're ethically superior. So many people fall into that trap as well. So anyway, I just... yeah, man, I'm glad you appreciated it, because I felt like I was a little schizo today as well, but I did the best I could, brother.
I think those are the best, man, because we really, when we sit down for, as long as we do, and we have these conversations, and this is the first show we've done together, but we come to a realization that we are constantly trading cards on the table in front of us. And we're trading cards, and we're only getting a benefit out of it. Because usually when you trade cards, you're like, oh, I don't want to give this one away. But when we have podcasts like this, we're trading cards, and it's just adding to our collection. And I love that, man. I love that. There's so many golden nuggets that we're flying around here. We're rich.
Thank you, buddy. I mean, that's why I love Sam too, right? Yeah. Like every time... Like, my favorite person to talk to is the person who gives me a reaction when I drop a truth bomb. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't help it because I want to feel right. I want to feel like that same emotion that now it's not always, there's always a layer of unfortunate, disturbing darkness that is attached to it. But throughout the course of the research, when you discover something that reinforces such critical information, that truly does make the alternative theory far more compelling, which so often is the case, then you get excited because you're just like, wow, I found another legitimate, credible, corroborative point that I can bring to the table that will reinforce this reality that we're facing. And kind of, again, it upends that inverted moral landscape to our own benefit, to where we can see through it. We see through the deception. The veil no longer remains. And thank God for that. And I thank God for my critical thinking skills and rejecting public school system as early on as I did. Like just having sort of these natural principles in place because, and I thank my parents for being moral and ethical and meaning well, having good intentions, because so many people have very bad examples in that context. And that's a very kind of, you're at a disadvantage, from the beginning. And that's I feel empathy. It's like, yeah, it's unfortunate, man, but
yep.
I do thank you so much for having me on, brother, and I do hope we can do this again very soon in the near future.
Absolutely, man.
I enjoyed this.
Absolutely, man. This was a great interview, man. Real quick for the audience, man, where can they find you and your shows and support you?
All right, guys. So the Underclass podcast is basically the main show that I started. My personal solo projects, all everything I do typically falls under that umbrella. I'll still post, Already Dead, the show I do with Jose on Tuesdays. We do it's basically what we call it, a call-in. Basically, we do a live stream call-in show where we effectively kind of discuss parapolitics and sort of bridge the gap, offering some sort of sense of credibility into the conspiratorial realm in a certain way. And I think it's become much more, it's more casual than what I do personally in my solo work. And I think I need that, right? It brings a little bit of, it helps relieve
balance.
Yes, exactly.
Balance the force.
100%, brother. And so we do that every Tuesday night, 9:30 Eastern time. This week we're actually, Jose's out of town, so I'm going to co-host. I asked Jules if he would co-host with me on Tuesday, and we're going to have
Jules from Grey Pilled?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He's supposed to be getting back to me with some dates, so if you could kind of sneak in my name there.
Yeah. I'll tell him for sure. Yeah, he's our producer basically now, because we started out and I had gotten Adam from Deborah Gets Red Pilled back in the day. I think I was his last interview ever, actually, before they decided to stop doing the show, which is super sad. And I love those guys, and I love Adam and Deborah, and I hope they do it again at some point. But either way, I really enjoyed talking to them. And he was always great, and so he was our first producer. But then his jiu-jitsu class and everything he was trying to accomplish as a homesteader at the time was just kind of like, it's too much for him to still show up reliably. So he kind of just separated, and but yeah, he's a good person. And then after that, though, we had to fill the void, and Jules was like, I'll do it, right, and volunteered his services. So we brought his ass in, and it's been a lot of fun. Nice. Honestly, just getting to know him better. But yeah, so he's gonna co-host with me on Tuesday instead of Jose, and we'll have Donut on as the guest. So that'll be fun, especially considering all these celebrity deaths that just took place.
I know, dude. And he was talking about it. Man, I wish I released it already, but we have it. It's coming. What's today? It'll be here next Wednesday. But
nice.
We were getting into it. We were getting into 201. We were getting into the numbers, and boom.
That's so
and I'm like, yo. And he was actually talking if you saw his Instagram post, he's like, oh, I was off a little bit by the date. Well, he was telling us that on the show, and I was like, oh man. And then boom, right, Hulk Hogan and all these celebrity deaths and everything. It's really crazy. It's all out there, folks. Check us out, support us wherever we're at, so we can keep on doing what we're doing, even though we're gonna keep doing it until they turn the lights off.
For sure.
For sure, man.
And I should say the Patreon is the best place to support me. Just as far as at least you can get something out of it. The incentive is there for even the lowest level, I think is a $3 tier. And basically I have a paywalled show called Whatever This Is. And that's me, Brad Binkley from the Propaganda Report, and then Sam, obviously, from Tinfoil Hat. So it's been a whole lot of fun, man. I love those guys. And I swear to God, man, like, I describe myself at this point. I told William Ramsey at one point, I said, we're all effectively disciples of Sam Tripoli at this moment.
Yeah, we're all his kids, bro. No lie.
Exactly. For real, dude. But anyway, I really do appreciate you, brother. So thank you again, man.
No worries, man. It was an honor, man, and a blessing. And I'm excited to create more content with you and just build relationship, man, because really that's the biggest thing too that I've learned just being podcaster and on this journey is I don't have to agree with everything, and I really think we shouldn't agree with everything, or else it might be kind of culty in a way. But and even just the religious aspect of things. Yeah, this is a Christian podcast, but what I'm trying to open up to the audience and to the gatekeepers and all this stuff is that we don't have to believe in the same thing, but we can build a relationship together, right? And that's like my key. My key is to build relationship with people, build friendships, and to change the game in that way. Because when we all come together and we're chain linked, arm in arm, dude, like it doesn't. At the end of the day, it our biased beliefs don't matter. It's our friendship at the end of the day that matters, man. And I love that. It's one of the biggest things that God's revealed to me in doing all this, because in the end, God's at work through everything, and he's working on people no matter what. And so, but how we're going to close this out is, if you don't mind, man, I'm going to close this out in a little prayer, and then,
love to.
And then that's it, man. So thank you again, bro. So Heavenly Father, man, we thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the amount of research and knowledge and dedication that went into this. And I just pray for Austin. I pray for his journey to be safe. I pray for you to be the light unto his path and to guide him in each and every way that he is seeking, Lord. And I just pray, God, that you just keep us safe, keep us humble, and keep our eyes on you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, brother. All right. Well, thank you again, Austin, man. And I appreciate this, man. And I'm excited to work with you more in the future.
100%, brother.